I'm your bedtime historian, and I've always found it amusing that the loudest ideas in your head tonight might belong to men who argued barefoot in dusty markets 24 centuries ago. Picture this: you lying here, half awake, and Socrates somewhere in the back of your mind, still mumbling questions nobody asked for. Do your daily worries echo an ancient riddle? Does your casual advice to a friend carry the ghost of an old Athenian toast? Maybe, maybe not. If you enjoy drifting through forgotten corridors of thought while the world sleeps, tap that like and subscribe. Think of it as your tiny vote for more philosophical insomnia. And if you're half dreaming already, I'd love to know what hour of the night do Greek ghosts sneak into your head. Now let's smooth out the blanket of your thoughts and wander into the invisible ideas you carry without even knowing it. You slip beneath the thin membrane that separates your conscious worries from the swirling currents of thought older than your language itself. Here, under the soft weight of your blanket, you start to notice how strangely familiar certain questions feel. Questions about right and wrong, freedom and fear, happiness and its sly twin regret. These invisible guests drift through your daily decisions, blending ancient syllables with modern sighs. Long before you posted your first existential meme, the Greeks were there spinning theories about your every trivial dilemma. They whispered that life's deepest puzzles might hide in plain sight in your arguments with a coworker, in the quiet pang of guilt when you eat too much cake, and the fleeting pride when you choose to hold your tongue. One historical fact that slips in here: the word ethics itself comes from the Greek ethos, meaning character or custom. Odd, isn't it, that your sense of right and wrong once hung on whether your neighbor thought you behaved properly in the agora. Scholars still argue whether this moral inheritance shapes you more than you'll ever admit. Do you truly believe in free will? Or are you like the Stoics, insisted a leaf on the breeze of fate, pretending to steer while secretly floating where the ancient winds decide? Take the simple act of planning your week. A grocery list, a budget spreadsheet, maybe a New Year's resolution that's already unraveling. These tiny moments carry Aristotle's ghost, the balance between excess and deficiency. Not too much, not too little, just enough to be virtuous. Even now, you hold these invisible scales in your mind's back pocket. And when your friend vents about the unfairness of the world, you might comfort them with a line the Epicureans would have loved. Hey, enjoy the small stuff. A glass of wine, a warm bath, an idle stroll, pleasures the ancient philosophers fought over like stray dogs squabbling for a loaf of stale bread. Drift deeper and see how these hidden frameworks tug at you when you least expect it. The next time you sit silently on a train, headphones and pretending not to eavesdrop on the couple fighting 2 seats ahead, remember Socrates poking merchants and priests until they admitted they knew nothing at all. He's in there somewhere, your personal heckler. A tiny voice that wonders, but why, every time you think you have an answer. Historians still debate whether this relentless questioning helps or harms our modern minds. Some say Socratic doubt keeps democracy alive. Others think it drives you into sleepless spirals of self-scrutiny, an endless loop of what if and how come that robs you of peace just when you need it most. Yet here you are, curled up seeking sleep, and instead floating in the invisible net of ancient thoughts. You carry these fragments like old coins in your pocket. They clink together when you speak, when you dream, when you wake up wondering why you do what you do. So lie back. Let the echo of invisible ideas seep into your pulse. Tonight, the philosophers have set up camp in the soft folds of your pillow. They'll keep asking gently, persistently, until your eyes close and your mind drifts into that quiet place where questions rest, if only for a little while. Softer voices rise from the dust of old city squares, whispers of gossip and laughter swirling between olive stalls and fishmongers' shouts. You step barefoot onto sun-warmed stone, drifting into Athens' restless hum. The agora is no grand marble temple, but a crowded marketplace where ideas wander like stray cats. It's here, amid clattering amphorae and petty deals, that Socrates works his peculiar magic, ruining good gossip with bad questions. Picture yourself leaning against a sun-bleached column, eavesdropping on a man in a plain cloak pestering a well-fed merchant. The fish seller wants to brag about a new catch. Socrates wants to dissect his soul instead. One question blooms into 10. Passers-by pause, amused or annoyed, as the philosopher unravels certainty like frayed thread. One solid fact: Socrates never wrote a single word himself. Everything we know comes secondhand, mainly from Plato, the student who scribbled his master's slippery questions into dialogues that still twist your brain today. It's almost funny, this ancient Athenian gossip circle, half marketplace, half moral maze. Socrates didn't stand on podiums. He stood in your way, asked why you bought what you bought, demanded to know whether you were good or just good at pretending. There's a deliciously petty detail here, too. Socrates' wife Xanthippe was said to be so sharp-tongued that she made her husband's public debates look tame. Some stories claim she once dumped a chamber pot over his head, mid-argument, an everyday Athenian domestic scene that, if true, proves even great thinkers can't escape dirty laundry. Historians still argue whether Socrates was a martyr for reason or an obnoxious troll who deserved the hemlock cup he finally drank. Did he really believe ordinary people could reach enlightenment in the city square? Or was he playing a private joke, watching minds unravel one careless question at a time? So stand here a moment longer in that noisy square. Feel the dusty breeze. Hear the distant donkey bray. Look at the man in simple sandals, poking at pride, peeling off layers of self-importance until there's nothing left but a dazed merchant and a half-empty stall. Somewhere between the price of olives and the price of truth, you begin to sense that these questions haven't left us at all. Next time you catch yourself asking, "But is that really true?" listen for the soft echo of Athenian gossip, carrying a barefoot philosopher's voice through the centuries into your sleepless head. The shadows flicker against a damp stone wall. You're sitting at the mouth of a cave you've never entered, yet somehow you know every echo inside. Plato's cave is not carved in rock alone. It's etched in the back of your eyelids every time you mistake shadows for truth. You lean against its cold entrance, now feeling the hush of torches crackle in the darkness. The prisoners inside don't know they're prisoners at all. Plato, the eager note-taker of Socrates' street lectures, dreamed up this eerie place to trap your mind in a riddle. Here's your one fact to clutch in the dark. Plato's famous allegory of the cave comes from the Republic, a dialogue that still fuels late-night debates in dorm rooms and cafe basements. In this cave, people sit chained facing a blank wall. Behind them, puppeteers wave cutouts in front of a fire, casting shadows that dance like truths. The prisoners see only flickers, never the real shapes, never the light outside. They argue about the shadows, gossip about them, live and die by them, never suspecting they're echoes of something real. One quirky twist: Plato's parable was also a political dig. He believed most Athenians were so distracted by gossip and power games that they mistook rumors for reality. To him, the average citizen was the prisoner who would rather cling to comforting illusions than risk the blinding daylight of real knowledge. Scholars still argue whether Plato's cave is just a metaphor for ignorance or a warning that even your own senses can't be trusted. Are you free if you believe the shadows on your wall, or only when you dare to turn your head toward the fire, painful as it is to glimpse the truth behind the flicker? Tonight you sit comfortably on this cold stone floor, flickering your own shadows on a digital cave wall. Each newsfeed scroll, each headline you half trust, each rumor you repeat, are they your chains? Or do they free you to imagine the light beyond? As you drift toward sleep, you carry the cave with you, a reminder that your mind loves illusions. The next time you wonder why certainty feels so thin, picture the flickering puppets and the shapes they cast. Then decide whether you're ready to squint into the sun or close your eyes and dream in shadows. A breath of warmer air lifts you from the cave's damp shadows and into a marble courtyard where logic paces in circles under the Mediterranean sun. Here stands Aristotle Plato's restless student, practical, organized, and just a little smug about how the world should work. If Plato wrapped truth in shadows and parables, Aristotle unwrapped it and filed it into neat categories like a philosopher librarian with a passion for order. You watch him now scribbling on a wax tablet nose, almost touching the surface as he divides life into virtues and vices. One clear fact: Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is still taught in classrooms worldwide, shaping the way millions think about what's good and right. Not bad for a man who spent much of his time fussing over whether friendship could be measured on a moral scale. Lean closer, and you'll see the quirky side Aristotle tutored a teenage Alexander the Great, a pupil so eager for conquest that some historians joke the philosopher's lectures wandered far beyond polite debates. Imagine balancing lessons on logic with lessons for a boy destined to flatten empires before breakfast. Historians still argue whether Aristotle's tidy moral rules truly help modern minds muddle through daily messes. His golden mean: the idea that virtue lies between extremes, sounds soothing on parchment. But can you really balance courage and caution when you're panicking over a late-night text you shouldn't have sent? You carry Aristotle's shadow every time you weigh a small sin against a greater virtue. Should you eat that last slice of cake? Should you say what you really think? Should you forgive that old friend? The scales in your head trace back to this courtyard, where a bearded man whispered that happiness, eudaimonia, isn't fleeting pleasure, but the steady glow of a life well lived. Next time you wrestle with guilt or pride, envy or restraint, remember you're performing a quiet Aristotelian ritual. Somewhere inside you, a ghostly teacher balances your urges on an invisible beam, nudging you back to a middle path. So lie here under a marble arch that doesn't exist except in your sleepy mind. Feel the columns cool against your back. Let the scales of old ethics clink and sway as you exhale. You're not alone with your restless conscience. Aristotle is there, shuffling his notes, nodding at your choices, scribbling your secrets in the margins of your dreams. A soft breeze rustles the vines overhead. Tonight, you slip through a hidden gate, stepping into a walled garden, blooming under the hush of ancient stars. You find Epicurus here, barefoot in the grass, a half-empty cup of watered wine at his side. Unlike Plato's caves or Aristotle's tidy lists, Epicurus offers you a wooden bench, and a promised pleasure is not a sin just misunderstood. Settle beside him among fig trees, and whispering leaves. This small garden, tucked behind humble walls in Athens, was more than a philosopher's retreat. It was a radical declaration that happiness belongs to everyone, not just the elite or the righteous. One historical fact that might surprise you: Epicurus welcomed women and slaves into his school, unthinkable for most philosophers of his day. Here, ideas bloomed among all who hungered for peace of mind. He taught that the greatest pleasures are simple friendship, freedom from fear, bread, cheese, maybe a sip of wine. Yet this gentle creed has sparked moral panic for centuries. The early Christians branded Epicureans as hedonists, party animals with grapes stuck to their chins and scandal on their lips. Ironically true, Epicureans feared wild excess. They saw too much pleasure as a doorway to pain. Picture Epicurus tonight smiling at your midnight snack, a stolen cookie or an extra spoonful of peanut butter. He'd nod approvingly at your small delight, then gently warn you not to let indulgence chain you to craving. His wisdom rests in moderation and joy, but never let enjoyment own you. A quirky detail that often gets skipped in dusty textbooks: Epicurus worried deeply about anxiety, especially the fear of death. He claimed, "There's no need to fear what we can't feel. Once you're gone, you're gone. So why waste your fleeting days dreading what you'll never sense?" To him, that fear was the biggest thief of life's simplest joys. Scholars still argue whether Epicurus was misunderstood by rivals or deliberately slandered to make other schools look holier than thou. Was he a calm voice of reason or a cunning rebel, slipping dangerous ideas into the cracks of polite society? Tonight, you stand among the fig trees, tracing the moonlight along a cracked stone wall. Imagine the soft laughter of his students, the warm hush of ideas shared over simple food. Maybe tomorrow, you'll choose a small pleasure that asks nothing in return: a sunbeam on your face, a bite of something sweet, the hush of your phone switched off for an hour. Epicurus's garden is not lost. It grows quietly in the moments you protect from worry. Lie back, let your breath settle among the leaves, and trust that pleasure can be gentle, honest, and calm. The world beyond the wall will wait. Tonight, there is only the garden, the wine, and the promise that simple joy, if you let it, might hush your fears to sleep. A final soft thought drifts by. If happiness could bloom in an old Athenian courtyard, maybe it can sprout in your restless mind too. Not loud, not wild, just enough to carry you toward dreams, untangled by guilt or dread. So close your eyes and stay in this walled orchard of moonlight and vine. Let the shadows of old panic dissolve in the hush of soft laughter and drift off, knowing that tonight's pleasure costs nothing but your quiet permission to rest. A low clang of metal, a distant trumpet. Suddenly you're far from the calm garden, wandering the muddy boots and disciplined dread of a Roman encampment at dawn. Greek thoughts didn't end in Athens. They hitched rides on legionnaires' sandals, slipping quietly into Roman minds, hardened by conquest and cold rations. Tonight, you drift beside these soldiers, their armor clinking in rhythm with philosophies borrowed from Stoas half a world away. Stoicism, the side hustle of survival when daily dread is standard issue. One solid fact: by the 1st century AD, Stoicism had become so popular among Rome's elite that emperors like Marcus Aurelius scribbled private reminders to stay calm while ruling an empire prone to riots and betrayal. But down here in the dirt, away from marble halls, Stoicism was not a polished school of thought. For the average soldier, it was a quiet chant. Endure, hunger, bear pain, accept fate. Life on campaign was a test of how well a man could muffle his fears while pretending the gods had no interest in his petty suffering. Picture a young centurion sitting on an upturned helmet. His rations are stale bread and salted fish, his hands cracked from endless drills. He repeats Epictetus's words under his breath. It's not things that upset you, but your judgment of them. Maybe he believes it. Maybe he doesn't. But the words give shape to silence when there's nothing left to fight but sleep. Here's a quirky detail. Stoic wisdom often spread through scribbled handbooks and murmured campfire lessons passed from veterans to fresh recruits like folk songs. No fancy lectures, just grit wrapped in borrowed Greek phrases. If the men returned home, they might carry fragments of these mantras into simple trades and fatherly scoldings, tiny echoes of a philosophy that refused to bow to misery. Historians still argue whether this Roman twist on Stoicism betrayed its Greek roots. Was it a cheap coping mechanism for brutal living, or a genuine evolution that made old ideas practical for new empires? Some say Marcus Aurelius's meditations read like field notes from the edge of endurance. Others see them as a last gasp of moral clarity in a world that no longer trusted itself. So tonight, as your thoughts march in tired formation, feel that ancient resolve settle under your ribs. Small worries tap their shields, demanding your fear. But Stoic whispers remind you what you control is tiny, what you accept is vast. The next time dread rattles its sword at you in the dark, imagine yourself a quiet legionnaire, leaning into the wind, repeating old Greek lines under your breath until the dawn comes calm as ever. You blink, and the clang of Roman helmets fades into a hush of chalk and parchment. Suddenly you're seated at a crude wooden desk, a single candle flickering beside a pile of scrolls that smell faintly of goatskin and ink. Zeno's paradoxes have arrived to trouble your sleep. Tiny brain puzzles from a man who found delight in watching logic trip over itself. You're not alone. Somewhere, in an ancient courtyard, a young student rubs his temples the same way you do when your office meeting turns into an argument that loops in circles until nobody remembers the point. One historical fact to ground you here: Zeno of Elea cooked up his paradoxes around 450 BCE. His favorite trick: proving that motion itself might be impossible, despite the fact that your heartbeat, your breath, and even this drifting thought all prove otherwise. Picture this: Achilles, the swift-footed hero, racing a lazy tortoise. The tortoise gets a head start. Zeno insists Achilles will never catch up, because every time he closes the gap, there's always a smaller gap ahead. Smaller, 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 forever. The finish line dissolves into infinity. Quirky detail: Zeno's thought experiments annoyed the Greeks so much, they argued about them for centuries, and some modern mathematicians still enjoy wrangling with his puzzles at midnight, halfway through a cup of stale conference coffee. Historians still argue whether Zeno was a genius defending his teacher Parmenides' abstract worldview, or just an ancient prankster who loved to tie logic in knots. Either way, his paradoxes pop up in strange places: quantum mechanics, debates, calculus classrooms, or when your coworker insists on adding one more thing to the meeting that should have ended half an hour ago. Think about it next time. Your brain spins circles at 2 a.m. Your worries, like Zeno's puzzles, keep splitting into smaller and smaller pieces, tricking you into chasing answers you'll never quite catch. The point was never to solve the riddle, but to notice how easily certainty unravels when you stare at it too long. So tonight, let Zeno's playful knots loosen your grip on your own endless loops. The paradox is not the problem. It's the sign that the world is too slippery to pin down completely. Close your eyes. Let the tortoise plod on. Achilles will never quite catch it, but maybe that's fine. After all, sleep cares nothing for finish lines. Somewhere between the shadows of Zeno's endless race and the soft hush of your pillow, a new voice stirs one you know far better than you think. It's the chatter inside your skull, the gentle and sometimes relentless monologue that wonders why you did what you did, whether you should have said what you didn't, and what you might do next time. This quiet echo. It's suspiciously Greek too. Lean closer. Socrates is still here poking at your certainty with questions you never asked for. One historical fact that drifts into your thoughts: Socrates believed in the daimonion, a divine inner voice that whispered warnings, tiny nudges that tugged him away from bad choices. He called it a spirit. You might call it your conscience, your gut instinct, your second-guessing shadow that lives behind your everyday grin. It's the same whisper that wonders, is this really you, as you scroll late at night or rehearse an argument you'll never have. A quirky note: centuries later, early Christian thinkers tried to link Socrates' daimonion to their idea of guardian angels, though the philosophers of Athens would have laughed themselves hoarse at the thought. To Socrates, it was never a being watching over him, just the echo of reason inside the human mind, testing every belief for cracks. Historians still argue whether Socrates invented this idea or simply gave words to what everyone already felt, a voice that's both you and not you, a partner in your private debates that never sleeps, no matter how much you beg it to hush. You know this voice. You hear it when you replay an awkward conversation for the 10th time, rewriting lines you'll never say. You sense it when you stand before the fridge at 3 a.m., negotiating with yourself about whether a snack counts if nobody's awake to see it. The next time you feel alone with your worries, remember you're hosting an ancient Greek dialogue in the soft folds of your brain. Socratic questions slip in every time you doubt, second guess, or weigh two truths that contradict each other. They remind you that certainty is a mirage, comforting, fleeting, and never quite enough. So let that inner voice drift tonight, its questions softening as your eyelids grow heavy. Let it tease you with gentle puzzles and quiet whys, then fade with the rhythm of your breath. After all, Socrates might have drunk the hemlock, but his whisper survives in you and everyone who ever lay awake arguing with themselves until dawn. The soft hush of your inner voice fades into the echo of sandals slapping dusty stone. Now you're following a figure who doesn't care about marble courtyards, polite debates, or polite clothing for that matter. Diogenes the cynic strolls through your mind tonight, carrying nothing but a battered cloak and a lantern he once claimed he'd use to find an honest man, though rumor says he never did. If Socrates annoyed polite society with questions, Diogenes insulted it outright, stripping away every social rule he could find, often literally. One undeniable fact: Diogenes lived in a barrel, some say a large ceramic jar, in the heart of Athens. He owned almost nothing, begged for scraps, and turned every city square into his stage for mocking manners and vanity. There's a delightfully rude detail here. Diogenes once wandered through the marketplace in broad daylight lantern held high, muttering that he was looking for a real human being. Another time, when Alexander the Great offered to grant him any wish, Diogenes barely looked up and said, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." Historians still argue whether Diogenes was a brilliant critic of hypocrisy or simply an eccentric vagrant who found performance art centuries before the term existed. His legacy gave birth to the Cynic movement philosophers who sneered at wealth power and the endless posturing of their Athenian peers. Tonight, you trail Diogenes through narrow streets where oil lamps flicker against whitewashed walls. He pauses, glares at well-dressed merchants, and says what you sometimes wish you could say to your own society's polite nonsense, that you don't really need half the things you think you do. In a world of carefully curated profiles and filtered realities, Diogenes is a stray dog, barking at the pretty fences, reminding you that there's freedom in shamelessness, a strange comfort in refusing to play along with everyone else's rules. Next time you catch yourself dressing up a truth, polishing your words for a meeting, or hiding your flaws behind a soft smile, imagine Diogenes raising his battered lantern in your mind. He's asking, are you being honest or just well-behaved? Maybe the answer doesn't matter. Maybe the question is enough. So follow him a little longer tonight. Step barefoot across the marble steps. Let the cool wind tangle your thoughts. Feel the tickle of rebellion brushing your worries clean. If a man could nap in a barrel and laugh at kings, maybe you too can peel off a layer of polite pretending, if only in your dreams. The barrel is gone now, and so is the sunlit square. Your thoughts drift forward, carried on the hush of centuries, until they settle in a modern hallway, painted with motivational quotes. Your self-help guru smiles from a podcast thumbnail, perched on a tidy bookshelf next to scented candles and a coffee mug that insists, you've got this. But listen closely, and you'll hear echoes of a marble stoa beneath that cheery surface. One simple fact, for your drowsy mind, the word Stoic didn't start as an adjective for someone who grits their teeth through trouble. It comes from the Greek stoa poikile, the painted porch in Athens, where Zeno of Citium taught his followers how to live calmly in a world determined to rattle them. A quirky detail that might slip your notice when you scroll past all the inspirational reels. Many modern wellness slogans are just warmed over stoicism. Control what you can let go of what you can't. Focus on your response, not the event. Stay present, each one a snippet of old porch talk dressed in a new blazer. Historians still argue whether today's motivational coaches do the Stoics justice or sell their wisdom like cheap incense. Marcus Aurelius never charged a subscription fee to read his meditations, but the same man's lines now decorate mugs, yoga mats, and morning routine planners. Perhaps he'd shrug Stoics' prized practicality after all. Picture it. Your favorite life coach leans back in a podcast chair reciting Epictetus to a soundtrack of lo-fi beats. Meanwhile, you scribble gratitude in your planner, half listening, half wondering if any of it sticks when your boss calls you at midnight. The old porch philosophers would likely chuckle at your cluttered mindfulness. For them, virtue was never about polished branding. It was about showing up for the hardest bits of life, illness, poverty, loss, and staying upright when the world tilted sideways. So the next time your favorite influencer urges you to be unshakable, pause and thank a Greek you've never met. You're standing in your own way on that painted porch, leaning against cool stone, listening to Zeno murmur that fate will toss you storms no vision board can calm. Your power is not to banish the storms, but to greet them with a sigh and a steady spine. Tonight drift off, knowing that every calm breath you take, every tiny boundary you set against the chaos, carries a brushstroke of ancient paint. One more hidden echo of a stoa that hasn't fallen, even if the porch is now your quiet mind. The modern porch fades, replaced by the clink of porcelain cups, and the faint swirl of pipe smoke. Tonight, you slip into a candlelit room where philosophy moved indoors, drifting from cold marble to warm cafes. It's the 18th century now, and you find yourself seated on a wobbly wooden chair, under low ceilings, stained dark with tobacco and whispered conspiracies. This is no ancient agora or painted stoa. This is the birth of the Philosophy Cafe. One fact to cradle as you sip an imaginary cup: coffee houses in Enlightenment Europe were more than places to warm your hands. In London, Paris, Vienna thinkers gathered at battered tables to argue about freedom, science, art, and reason-fueling revolutions, one bitter brew at a time. There's a delightful detail in these caffeinated corners. Some cafes charged a single penny for admission, granting you access to the day's newspapers and the chatter of poets, radicals, and crackpot dreamers. For many, it was cheaper than a book and far more dangerous to your certainty. Historians still argue whether these smoky salons birthed democracy or just gave self-important men a stage for their monologues. Some believe the caffeine-fueled debates helped spread ideas that toppled kings. Others suspect they mostly inflated egos and sold stale biscuits. Picture a young student hunched over a chipped cup, scribbling notes, as a gray-bearded pamphleteer rants about Voltaire's heresies. Someone laughs. Someone else frowns. A waiter brushes by, balancing tiny cups on a dented tray, eavesdropping on revolutions in disguise. And you, half asleep in your own bed, centuries later, hold your mug the same way. Maybe you don't sip next to Rousseau or Diderot, but every time you nurse a late-night espresso while reading online arguments about freedom and truth, you drift back into that old cafe, the quiet hum of ideas swirling like steam. So next time you find yourself staring into the swirl at the bottom of your cup, wondering whether anything you say or read changes the world at all, remember the penny cafes. Their wooden chairs are long gone, their patrons long dust. But the warmth of debate still lingers every time caffeine and curiosity share a table. Tonight, listen for the ghost of porcelain cups clinking somewhere deep in your sleepy mind. Let the warmth curl your fingers, the old arguments hush your thoughts. Drift off in a corner booth where the world's great questions still simmer in silence, waiting for dawn. A whisper of parchment rustles you away from the cafe's smoky warmth. Now you slip through a creaking monastery door, where the hush of candlelight guards thoughts too precious to lose. Tonight, you walk the stone halls of hidden schools, quiet sanctuaries, where Greek philosophy survived the long, dark centuries when libraries burned and old cities crumbled. Monks bent over fragile manuscripts, eyes straining in flickering lamplight, saving Aristotle one inked line at a time. One historical fact to cradle here: for centuries after the fall of Rome, much of Aristotle's work vanished from the Latin West, preserved instead in Arabic translations, kept alive by scholars in Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo. When Europe finally remembered how to ask big questions, it did so by borrowing them back through these careful scribes. A quirky note: medieval monks often stuffed Aristotle's pages between hymns and herbal recipes, binding logic with prayers and garden cures. An ordinary monk might spend a lifetime copying the same passage, his breath freezing in the scriptorium, fingers cramped yet steady, adding marginal doodles of rabbits and dancing devils when the night grew too long. Historians still argue whether these hidden schools safeguarded wisdom for truth's sake or for power. Some abbots hoarded scrolls to outwit rivals or please kings, not to free your thoughts in the dead of night. Yet without their secret toil, the bright threads of Greek debate might have frayed into nothing. You pause beside a wooden desk, tracing your finger over words pressed so thin they almost vanish into vellum. Maybe you imagine the robed copyist who once scratched these lines, whispering a silent vow to preserve more than parchment, a bridge between Plato's cave and your late night wandering. So next time you open a dusty book or drift through an old library, think of the hidden schools. Remember that philosophy didn't just survive on grand marble porches or rowdy coffee houses. It slipped through cold cloisters, smuggled past watchful eyes, inked into scraps and scraps again, until they reached you. Tonight, drift deeper into this stone corridor, where warm candle stubs cast trembling shadows over quiet pages. Let the hush of monk scholars and secret scribes calm the restless edges of your mind. The debates they saved still hum behind your eyelids, waiting to unfold when your dreams grow curious. The scent of beeswax and ink fades into the echo of heavy boots on university floors. Your dream drifts now into the echoing halls of medieval Europe, where Greek ghosts woke up angry under vaulted ceilings. Tonight, you find yourself perched on a cold wooden bench, surrounded by scholars in robes so stiff they squeak when they shuffle. They argue under candlelight, waving quills like tiny swords. Somewhere in the shadows, Plato's restless spirit lingers fuel for endless academic battles. One fact for your sleepy mind during the 12th and 13th centuries. Europe's first universities, Paris, Bologna, Oxford, became battlegrounds for old Greek ideas newly rediscovered through Arabic texts. Philosophy wasn't a polite conversation here. It was an intellectual brawl where theologians and scholars dueled over Aristotle's stubborn logic and Plato's tricky idealism. Picture Thomas Aquinas, that careful titan of medieval thought, trying to tame Aristotle's words to fit church doctrine, bridging Greek reason with Christian faith. There's a quirky detail, too. In Paris, students sometimes rioted when lectures got banned, or professors clashed with bishops. Imagine picket lines, but everyone's armed with books and rhetorical zingers. Historians still argue whether these medieval thinkers honored the Greeks or twisted them to keep power. Did Plato's ghost haunt dusty lecture halls out of loyalty to truth, or was it shackled to theological battles that reshaped his puzzles for the convenience of popes and kings? You sit here in this candlelit chamber, your breath misting in the cold. The air hums with whispered Latin phrases, the scratching of quills, the low grumble of hungry students trading bread crusts for borrowed lecture notes. Next time you hear the word scholar, remember it doesn't always mean peaceful libraries and polite debates. Once, it meant a room like this, heated only by the friction of minds colliding their echoes, carrying Plato's ghost into every argument about soul's logic or the shape of angels dancing on pins. So lie back on this creaking bench in your dream. Let the clash of Latin words soften into a distant hum. Somewhere deep in that noise, Greek questions linger, still ancient puzzles, dressed in medieval robes, waiting for you to listen while the rest of the world sleeps. The stone lecture halls grow hazy, candles sputter out, and now your drifting thoughts tumble into something stranger, still a modern maze, where ancient puzzles wear neon masks. Tonight, you wander into the realm of postmodern puzzles, those tangled riddles that whisper, "Nothing is what it seems," then grin when you try to prove them wrong. But if you peel back the hashtags and ironic memes, you'll find old Greek fingerprints underneath. One fact to carry into this paradoxical fog: philosophers like Derrida and Foucault, the pranksters of postmodern thought, openly borrowed ancient Greek skepticism. They twisted old doubts about truth into fresh knots, tying your brain into loops that Socrates himself might applaud. A quirky detail you might never spot while scrolling even your memes. Those sly looping jokes that argue with themselves, trace a thin line back to Zeno's paradoxes and Diogenes' sarcasm. Each share and repost flickers like a torch in Plato's cave shadows, reshaping shadows. Historians still argue whether postmodernism frees your mind or traps it in word games. Are you liberated when everything can be deconstructed? Or do you just stand dizzy in a hall of mirrors, wondering if any truth survived the funhouse? Picture yourself, here phone in hand at 2 a.m., half laughing at a viral meme that mocks the same moral codes Aristotle once inked into tidy lines. It tells you nothing matters, but of course, it matters enough to share. Another paradox lurking in the glow of your screen. And somewhere a ghostly Greek chorus snickers. What you call late-night doom scrolling is just another echo of debates that once rattled city squares, candlelit cloisters, and smoky cafes. Nothing is new, only dressed up in fresh slang, wrapped in ironic hashtags, drifting into your sleepless thoughts like an owl at dusk. So tonight, when your mind races with questions that curl back on themselves, let them curl. Let the memes morph into riddles, and the riddles soften into dreams. Maybe there's no single answer, just a trail of echoes leading you deeper into this soft, restless night. Close your eyes. Feel the flicker of neon puzzles fade into the hush behind your eyelids. Let the paradox drift unguarded through your thoughts. There's freedom in a question, with no end, an ancient comfort dressed in modern chaos. At last, the glow of paradox and neon fades, and you drift gently home to the softest echo of all your everyday thoughts, so plain they hardly feel philosophical at all. Tonight, you settle into this final hush, with a small realization: ancient Greek debates didn't vanish in dusty scrolls or candlelit libraries. They slipped into your daily murmurs, quiet passengers in your mind, as you weigh what to say, when to forgive, how to hope. One fact to carry into your deepest sleep: even the simplest modern words, ideologic ethics, are Greek ghosts, dressed as ordinary speech. You whisper them to yourself without a second thought, yet they come trailing centuries of argument and ink-stained hands. A gentle, overlooked detail the philosopher Heraclitus once claimed: you can't step into the same river twice. Now you say, it is what it is, and somewhere that old river chuckles behind your sigh. Small echoes hidden everywhere. Historians still argue whether this inheritance is a blessing or a burden. Does carrying these invisible frameworks make you wiser? Or do they simply weigh your mind with puzzles no sleep can untangle? Maybe both. Maybe that's why your thoughts loop under the covers when you wish they'd hush. Picture it. You sit on a bus phone in hand, worries muttering about tomorrow, and tucked inside that swirl is Aristotle's scale balancing guilt and virtue. Epicurus, whispering to taste your small pleasures. Socrates poking your certainty with a quiet, but why? Every meme that wraps truth in irony. Every pep talk that recycles Stoic. Calm every midnight spiral that wonders whether life has shape or meaning. Each is a tiny nod to a ghostly gathering you never truly left. So tonight, as your breathing slows and the weight of blankets grounds you in the here and now, know that these Greek shadows don't demand answers. They only keep you company while the world hushes itself into dreams. Let their debates drift into the quiet hum of your own heartbeat. Let the questions fold themselves into tomorrow's dawn. You are a soft echo of every philosopher who ever wondered if the stars care about mortal thoughts, and tonight you get to wonder no more. Let the hush cradle you one last time, then rise. The hush behind you, the path ahead. Beyond the olive groves, a dirt trail waits under your sandals. Where philosophers turn their backs on the city's noise, will follow their footprints into the forests and the river that never stays the same. You walk along a dirt path that winds away from the chiseled columns of Athens past sun-baked vineyards and stray goats. Here your sandals leave prints where once men like Heraclitus might have stood muttering riddles to riverbanks instead of crowds. He was the dark philosopher of Ephesus, famously cryptic, famously cranky. He loathed the chatter of public life so much he turned his back on Athens altogether, choosing instead the hush of the Anatolian forests where he could puzzle over the ever-changing flow of water and time. One fact Heraclitus believed: you could never step into the same river twice. But did he really mean the river or the mind that steps into it? Historians still squabble about that line like pigeons over breadcrumbs. Was he arguing about identity flux or just being playfully annoying to anyone trying to pin him down? Picture him there barefoot, robes smeared with pine sap, hair tangled like a startled crow. He wrote in fragments, cryptic half-verses scattered on scraps of bark and parchment. Local villagers thought him half-mad, yet they'd creep closer, hoping to catch a line or two of this riddling river talk, just enough to impress a neighbor at the next feast. You move on, following other footpaths, winding through forgotten enclaves. Beyond Heraclitus lies Xenophanes, who left Colophon to wander from festival to festival, scandalizing polite company with pointed lines about the folly of praying to statues. He sneered at Homer's gods too, human, too scandalous, too absurdly petty. He preached a single divine unity, instead drifting from town to town like a prophet with no altar. Some say his traveling shows inspired an entire generation to question Olympus. Others argue he was just another old man yelling at clouds, except the clouds listened. The breeze grows cooler now as you push deeper into the hills. The sound of Athens fades entirely. No shouting merchants, no haranguing philosophers, no bored students waiting to catch a famous teacher's discarded metaphor. Instead, you find clean air and distant echoes of the Ionian coast, where the next thinkers wait perched on cliffsides or pacing along pebbled shores. But don't hurry there yet. Linger with the remote thinkers who made an art of not showing up. They remind you that sometimes the best ideas bloom in empty rooms, half scribbled on wax tablets no one will ever find whole. They remind you that even in a civilization obsessed with debate, some minds preferred the company of waves and wind to arguments over wine. Imagine if they'd all stayed in Athens. Would we have ever heard of them? Or would they have been drowned out by louder cynics, by the political machinations of Socrates' courtroom, by the back and forth of Plato's academy? Some scholars wonder if the real reason these remote thinkers still whisper to us through time is because they whispered to so few people back then. Their words didn't get ground down by the city's endless noise. So you rest for a moment here on a mossy stone. Maybe you hear a goat's bell in the distance, or the soft crunch of an unseen hermit pacing just out of sight. Maybe that's Heraclitus again, muttering about rivers and flames, flickering like a riddle in your mind. Maybe you're not meant to solve him, just to let him drift by, like water carrying your thoughts somewhere quieter than you've ever been. A hush of salt air greets you as you leave the hills behind and step onto a pebbled path sloping gently toward the sea. Ionian waters glitter ahead, an endless canvas for minds that never sat still for the noise of Athens. Here along this rugged coastline, entire schools of thought were carved into cliff faces and whispered to the waves. Long before philosophers gathered under marble porticos, they found their sanctuary in coastal retreats. The Ionian coast today, scattered along Turkey's western shores, was home to thinkers who traded urban chatter for sea spray and salt winds. Miletus, for instance, looked out onto the restless Aegean and produced minds restless to match. One fact Thales of Miletus, father of natural philosophy, first suggested that water was the root of all things. He didn't just study streams and rivers, he saw the entire cosmos reflected in the tide's ebb and flow. Historians still puzzle over how much of Thales's watery wisdom was science myth or just poetic guesswork disguised as philosophy. Picture him perched on a rocky ledge at dawn, scribbling on a wax tablet, balanced on his knee, hair soaked with sea mist. According to one story, half joke, half legend, he was so busy stargazing that he fell into a well. Local farmers mocked the philosopher, too lost in the heavens to mind his own feet. You smile, imagining the clumsy genius, dripping wet, already muttering to himself how wells and stars were both wells of truth. Further up the coast, you stumble upon Anaximander Thales' student who dared to dream bigger than water. He whispered of the Apiron, the infinite, the boundless, from which all things emerge. No temples, no civic debates, just the hush of waves, and an old man pointing at the horizon, insisting that somewhere out there lay the secret of everything. Some argue he might have sketched the first map of the known world, inked with rivers and mountains like veins and bones of a living body. Historians still debate whether that parchment survived even a single generation before dissolving into rumor and salt air. You pause where the shore meets the cliffs. Pebbles grind beneath your feet. White foam hisses over dark stones. A fishing boat bobs lazily nearby, a reminder that for these thinkers, the sea wasn't just metaphor. It was livelihood, danger, and teacher all at once. Their cosmologies were salted by the same winds that fed families and wrecked ships. Not far from Miletus stands Ephesus, another harbor city that hosted Heraclitus for a while, though he preferred the forest shadows to the docks. And a little further down the coast lies Samos, Pythagoras' island, before he drifted south. But don't peek ahead yet. His secrets wait for you later. For now, breathe in the coastal air that made men dream about atoms' motion and what lay beyond the stars. Sometimes you think of Athens as the brain of ancient Greece, buzzing crowded endlessly, debating itself. But these Ionian schools remind you that its beating heart might have been the coastline wild wind, tossed unconcerned with city noise. Here ideas washed ashore like driftwood, weathered by the elements, shaped by salt, polished by solitude. Stay a while among these sea philosophers. Let the hush of the tide smooth out your own restless thoughts. Somewhere, a stone tablet crumbles under layers of sand, a fragment of some ancient debate about whether the universe floats on water or fire or air. The words are gone, but the waves are still here, and they still speak if you lean close enough to listen. A faint drumbeat echoes in your mind as you drift inland from the Ionian shores. The sea hush fades behind you, replaced by flickering torchlight and the faint strains of chanting carried through cypress groves. Somewhere deeper in the dark, the mystery cults wait, half religion, half underground, philosophy, their secrets kept hidden from curious city scribes. Orphic rituals were among the strangest. Greece had to offer part myth, part mind experiment. Followers of Orpheus, the legendary poet who charmed the underworld, believed that truth wasn't found in public debate, but in sacred songs whispered in the dark. No marble colonnades here, just moonlit glades, veiled initiates, and symbols scribbled onto thin strips of gold and buried with the dead. One fact, Orphics believed the soul was divine, but trapped in a cycle of rebirth and decay, an echo of older Eastern ideas that drifted west along the same trade routes as silk and spices. Historians still argue whether these cults were fringe mystics, early proto-philosophers, or something stranger, an underground brotherhood smuggling Eastern thought into Greek temples under the cover of night. Picture yourself stepping barefoot onto cold marble steps leading down into a torch-lit cavern. The air is thick with smoke resin, herbs perhaps a trace of something more mind-bending slipped into the ritual wine. Figures in linen robes trace circles on the floor chanting the names of half-forgotten gods that never made it into respectable Greek myth. Quirky detail, Orphic followers carried tiny inscribed gold leaves, passports for the soul's journey beyond death. One scrap, found in a tomb, reads like an ancient boarding pass. Tell Persephone you come pure of heart. A strange insurance policy to slip between your teeth as you cross into the shadows. If the city philosophers debated the nature of the soul in broad daylight, the Orphics asked the same questions through riddles, music, and whispers. Did they know something Athens didn't? Or were they just the rebellious Goth kids of ancient Greece refusing to be pinned down by polite company? Scholars still disagree. Some call them visionaries. Others call them charlatans in fancy tunics. You listen as drums grow softer, replaced by flutes and quiet hymns that coil around your mind like gentle smoke. The night deepens. A single flame flickers in a bronze bowl, reflected in the wide eyes of an initiate who's about to glimpse what lies beyond the everyday world. You imagine the hush that follows an entire room leaning forward, desperate to catch the final line of a hymn only half revealed. Further down the stone corridor, you sense other cults' Bacchic rites, drenched in wine and dance Eleusinian mysteries that promised a glimpse of life and death stitched together. Greece's respectable philosophers like to pretend these rituals were separate from their neat syllogisms and logical proofs. But in the dark, the lines blurred. Some of these thinkers slipped off their togas and joined the chorus, seeking the same hidden truths they'd never admit to in the agora's bright sun. So you linger in the flicker and the hush, letting the shadows close gently around you. Outside, Athens still roars. Inside a gold leaf waits for your tongue, a whispered password for the next world, and a question no public debate will ever answer. A soft knock of sandal on marble brings you back into the moonlight, leaving behind the murmurs of hidden hymns. Now your path winds toward Alexandria's libraries and lecture halls. But tonight, the torches don't flicker for bearded old men alone. Tonight they burn for voices, too often smothered under layers of scroll dust and patriarchal pride, the women philosophers who found ways to speak when few expected them to. In your quiet steps, picture Hypatia, teacher-mathematician, philosopher of Alexandria, walking through bustling streets, draped in linen scrolls tucked under her arm like daggers of pure thought. Hypatia's students gathered at dawn near the great Serapeum, hungry for her lectures on geometry, astronomy, and Plato's dialogues. She rode through the city in a chariot instead of hiding behind closed doors, scandalizing the proper folk who thought philosophy was no place for a woman's voice. One fact, Hypatia wasn't just the first well-recorded female philosopher of her city, she was a political figure too. Her correspondence influenced city governors and bishops. Historians still argue whether her murder by a Christian mob was purely religious or partly an attempt to silence a woman who wielded reason as deftly as any priest's sermon. Imagine her chalking figures onto a courtyard, stone robes sweeping past clusters of young men who hung on every word, Euclidean proofs, Ptolemaic orbits, questions about the very shape of the cosmos, whispered under the scent of myrrh and burning oil lamps. And Hypatia was not alone, though most of her sisters in reason slipped quietly through the gaps of written history. Take Diotima, whose voice echoes only through Plato's Symposium, where Socrates credits her for his lessons on love. Was she a real philosopher, or a convenient mouthpiece for male ideas? Scholars squabble endlessly over whether Diotima walked Athens streets at all, or only lived in the minds of men who needed her wisdom, but not her name on the scroll. Quirky detail. Some lesser-known female thinkers, like Theano, linked to Pythagoras' brotherhood, were rumored to have guarded secret rules of household harmony and cosmic math alike. Imagine balancing your soup pot while solving for the golden ratio, domestic and divine, all in one breath. Now by lamplight, your mind drifts through hidden chambers, where women inked fragments of thought that never reached marble archives. A few scraps remain names scratched beside male teachers' lines, attributed but never fully theirs. Yet here, in your imagination, they reclaim the lecture halls, the scriptoriums, the chance to chart stars and test riddles under the same sky that once tried to keep them silent. If Athens was proud of its democratic debates, it still reserved most of its benches for men. But tonight, in this quiet corner of your drifting mind, you sit at Hypatia's feet instead. You watch her draw spirals of planets across the sand. You hear the clink of her tools as she measures shadows to unlock secrets of the heavens. You glimpse a world that might have been one where the loudest scrolls were balanced by voices that never needed permission to speak. And for now, in this hush, between lost pages, they do. A faint hum of strings drifts in as you leave Alexandria's echoing lecture halls behind. You follow it down moonlit steps into a garden courtyard where shadows flicker under oil lamps. Here, in a hidden grove, scented with laurel and burnt offerings, you find a circle of figures clad in simple linen. They lean over curious symbols etched in the sand triangles, spirals, the soft geometry of secret worship. This is where Pythagoras' secret lingers. Most remember Pythagoras as that triangle-obsessed math teacher who gave us the theorem everyone forgot after high school exams. But step closer, and you'll find his legacy runs deeper and stranger than right angles and hypotenuses. His followers weren't just students. They were initiates in a brotherhood that mixed numbers with mysticism, discipline with silence, logic with ritual. One fact, Pythagoras' community on Croton functioned almost like a cult, strict vows of secrecy, a ban on eating beans, yes beans, and a belief that numbers had souls. Historians still argue whether this odd society was more about mathematics or about forging an early spiritual order hidden under the guise of proofs and equations. Picture this. Robed initiates gather before dawn to study ratios and harmonies by the faint glow of olive oil lamps. They speak little, sometimes not at all convinced that true wisdom lives in quiet patterns, not loud debate. At night they hum strings and pluck monochords to reveal how musical notes could echo cosmic order proof that the universe might be built on the same ratios that make a lyre sing in tune. Quirky detail. They also swore to keep their discoveries secret, which partly explains why Pythagorean teachings come to us wrapped in rumor and second-hand whispers. What survives are scraps, hints about the transmigration of souls-coded tables of numbers, and the faint echo of a vegetarian rule that made sure no beans passed their lips. Why beans? Some say they believed beans contained souls, Others suspect more practical reasons beans make you gassy, which is not ideal for meditative silence. Either way, scholars still giggle over that debate 2 millennia later. You crouch beside the circle, tracing a spiral into the sand with your finger. Imagine the discipline it took to hold one's tongue for hours, days, even believing that the shape of silence mirrored the geometry of the universe. For them, mathematics wasn't just a tool. It was a ritual, a pathway to the divine. The theorem you learned half asleep in school was for them an incantation, part of a cosmic map connecting numbers' harmony and the soul's secret journey from life to life. You feel the hush of Croton settle into your bones, a quiet stricter than any city square debate. These thinkers turned their backs on public squabbles, choosing instead to guard their discoveries like temple treasures. It's easy to imagine how frustrating that must have been for the outside world's suspicious neighbors who saw only a secretive circle refusing beans and whispering about eternity behind locked gates. But maybe that's what made their ideas last. While Athens busied itself with open disputation, Pythagoras' brotherhood burrowed their equations into hidden manuscripts and coded chants. Some secrets slipped through the cracks, of course. Others are likely still buried in dusty cellars beneath sun-baked Italian stones, waiting for some wandering mind to stumble on them centuries later. You rise from the sand, brushing away the spiral with your palm. Behind you, the monochord's hum fades into the night air. Ahead, new islands call places where rival thinkers sharpened arguments like knives across the marble of Lesbos and Rhodes. But for now, the soft aftertaste of Pythagoras' secrets drifts with you as you step back into the moonlit path. Your feet find firmer ground as you drift away from the hush of Croton's guarded courtyards. The sea returns this time, dotted with sails, slipping between green islands under a restless sun. Welcome to the rival islands, places like Lesbos and Rhodes, where philosophy didn't hide behind temple doors, but clashed openly like dueling poets under olive groves. These islands were more than just sleepy outposts on the map. They were intellectual crossroads, quiet enough to think, crowded enough to argue. Lesbos, for instance, gave the world more than lyrical love poems and Sappho's half-lost verses. It was also home to Theophrastus, Aristotle's prize student, who drifted here to push philosophy beyond Athens' shadow. One fact, Theophrastus is sometimes called the father of botany for his studies of plants, herbs, and their hidden lives. Historians still argue whether his island garden notes count as real philosophy or just an eccentric hobby that bloomed into early science. Some fragments read more like poetic field guides than cold botanical lists, scented lines about fig trees, and the secret moods of olives under changing winds. Picture him wandering sunlit groves with a reed pen tucked behind his ear, stopping to scratch notes about how one laurel leaf curls, how another resists drought. His mind drifted from Aristotle's dry syllogisms to the green tangle of real-life proof that philosophy could root itself in the soil as easily as it soared among the stars. Rhodes, meanwhile, gleamed like a marble beacon for thinkers and orators who clashed not with swords, but with sharpened tongues. The island schools rivaled Athens' repute, drawing ambitious students from as far as Rome's restless provinces. Here, rhetoric wasn't just an art, it was survival. Masters of speech taught students to twist logic and flourish gestures, forging politicians, poets, and future enemies of the Senate alike. Quirky detail, Rhodes boasted giant open-air theaters, where philosophers sometimes competed for crowds with touring tragedians and wandering bards. Imagine the clash, a stern lecture on ethics, interrupted by a drunk actor rehearsing a chorus just down the colonnade. Scholars still bicker about whether Rhodes truly rivaled Athens in philosophical depth or merely served as a finishing school for the sons of wealthy Romans seeking polite polish. What's certain is that its island air crackled with debate whispers of maritime trade and the slap of sandals on marble as students argued late into the night under flickering oil lamps. Now you drift between these rival islands in your mind: Lesbos, with its soft gardens and Theophrastus's muttered herb lists; Rhodes, with its rhetorical duels echoing across white courtyards. In their small rivalries, they kept Greek thought alive outside Athens's stifling certainty. Ideas bloomed in salt air, carried by merchant ships from port to port, seeded into scrolls bound for distant libraries. Pause for a moment on a stone wall overlooking the harbor. The wind tangles your hair, your sandals tap the sun-warmed marble. Far below, fishermen haul in nets heavy with glistening fish, just another ancient reminder that even philosophy must sometimes bow to dinner. And yet, somewhere among the barrels and ropes, a stray scroll sits tucked in a merchant's chest, inked with words that will outlast this market by millennia. You breathe in the salt air, half listening for a student's laughter, drifting from a distant courtyard. Islands always keep secrets, some small like a hidden cove, some vast like an unwritten theory, waiting for curious minds to sail by and claim it as their own. You're ready to set sail again now, toward wonders hoarded not on islands, but in vast libraries, where scrolls pile higher than temple spires. A hush of parchment greets you, next soft dry brittle, as you brush your fingertips across rows of rolled scrolls, stacked from floor to vaulted ceiling. You've left the sunlit courtyards of Lesbos and Rhodes behind for the cool, shadowed aisles of ancient library wonders. Here in these hoarded stacks, knowledge piled up like grain, precious and prone to catching fire if the wrong torch flickered too close. You stand now inside a forgotten library. Alexandria is the grandest name, but it was far from the only place where scrolls multiplied like ivy. Ephesus, Pergamon, Antioch cities, whose spines of shelves bristled with clay tablets, wax codices, and parchment covered in spidery Greek script. Some were poems and tragedies. Others were letters between scholars, disputes, jokes, sudden flashes of insight scribbled in margins no scribe ever bothered to tidy up. One fact: Alexandria's library, that gleaming lighthouse of knowledge, once housed an estimated 500,000 scrolls. Historians still quarrel over the real number. Did scribes exaggerate to win royal funding? Or was it truly that vast a labyrinth of learning where a single wrong step could bury you in paper and dust? Picture yourself creeping between shelves by lamplight nose tickled by old parchment. Scholars here weren't just reading. They were collectors, smugglers, sometimes even pirates of paper. A new book, off a ship seized, copied, returned, if you were lucky. The Ptolemy's agents scoured every merchant vessel docking at Alexandria's harbor, confiscating scrolls to feed their insatiable stacks. Quirky detail: it's whispered that Pergamon's library rivalry with Alexandria triggered an arms race of parchment. When Egypt cut off papyrus exports to starve Pergamon's scribes, they improvised stretching animal skins into thin pages. Thus, the humble word parchment was born from Pergamon's name, a bitter gift of literary spite that outlived both libraries' walls. You find a quiet corner now, surrounded by towering shelves that lean under the weight of ideas. Here scholars like Callimachus organize these scrolls into the first known library catalogs, delicate lists on papyrus mapping thoughts across centuries and continents. Some wonder whether those catalogs survive disguised as fragments in later chronicles, or buried in monastery vaults nobody's thought to dust off yet. What survives of these library wonders isn't so much the walls, fires, floods, and invaders made sure of that, but the whispers carried forward by lucky scraps, a torn page stuffed into a monk's robe, a single line referenced by a Roman poet who once sat where you now stand, listening for echoes of the ancients. You reach for an imaginary scroll, its brittle reed ties crumbling under your thumb. Perhaps it's a lost play of Euripides, or one of Aristotle's rumored lost treatises, his rumored dialogues that scholars chase like ghosts through footnotes and half-remembered lines. Historians still argue how much slipped into the fire, how much might be found again in dusty tombs, or perhaps never existed except in rumor's careful glow. For now, let this library fold you in shelter, you beneath timber beams, groaning under centuries of thought. Somewhere a candle flickers on a reading desk, where a lone student nods off scroll unfurled across his chest. Perhaps he dreams of how to smuggle this page across borders, out of reach of flame, into some future room where you too might stand quietly reading under lamplight, surrounded by the sigh of parchment as it breathes secrets to the patient and the curious. You tuck the scroll back in its shelf, stepping softly toward deeper aisles. Beyond this labyrinth, more voices wait, dialogues lost, and found wandering teachers on roads, eastward, ideas smuggled over deserts and rivers. For now, the library keeps its hush, and so do you. A breeze of imagination carries you forward, out of the stuffy hush of library walls and into broken courtyards where lost dialogues scatter like fallen leaves. In your mind's eye, marble columns lean drunkenly toward each other as if straining to remember words once carved into wax tablets that now lie buried, dissolved by rain and time. You stand among shattered stones and half-buried statues, a lone figure bending to trace a line of faded Greek scratched into an altar base. These are the echoes of conversations never finished, arguments interrupted by fire theft or simple neglect. Whole works that once shaped minds like Plato's Hermocrates gone, Aristotle's dialogues on friendship laughter or lost cities whispers only. Scrolls so fragile they crumbled before they were copied, yet they linger in footnotes, offhand mentions in other books, breadcrumbs for the curious. One fact of Aristotle's original works, nearly 200 by some guesses, only about 30 survive intact. Historians still debate whether the rest ever really existed in tidy scrolls or were simply spoken lectures never fully transcribed. Rumor claims whole bundles were hidden away by his heirs, then lost, when invaders rummaged through libraries like careless cats in a scroll shop. Imagine crouching beside a ruin at dawn, the stones still cool beneath your fingertips. You squint at chisel marks, hoping to piece together a single sentence. It's a dream that has driven centuries of scholars to dig through tombs, monastery cellars, sunken ships, where salt and time might have preserved one fragile scrap. Quirky detail. In the 20th century, papyrus rolls used to stuff Egyptian mummy casings revealed half-lost plays and poems practical recycling that turned a body's final resting into a library's last stand. Historians joke that if you want to find the missing dialogues, check a forgotten tomb or the hidden cavity of a painted coffin lid. So here you stand in these ruins, one foot on history's shoulders, the other nudging at buried secrets. Each cracked marble step whispers about students debating under olive trees, about scribes who coughed from candle smoke as they copied line after line by flickering light. Sometimes you wonder what answers to questions still plague us. Ethics, love, governance might be coiled inside those lost words. Scholars argue whether these missing scrolls would truly change how we think, or whether they'd merely confirm what the surviving words already hint at. Are they holy grails of knowledge, or ghost stories? For sleepless academics, wind rattles dry reeds nearby. You imagine a scribe's shadow, slipping behind a column, clutching a scroll that never made it back to the shelf. Maybe it's hidden in a desert cave. Maybe it rotted away inside a clay jar, buried under centuries of shifting sand. Or maybe it waits in plain sight, misfiled under an incorrect name, leafing through its own pages when no one's looking. The ruin settles into dusk as you stand up, brushing marble dust from your palms. Lost dialogues are like half-heard lullabies, unfinished songs that fade just before the best verse. You listen for a last whisper of ancient voices before turning your gaze eastward. There, a thin road winds toward the next chapter. Wandering teachers who carried Greek ideas across deserts and mountains, scattering seeds of philosophy, far from Athens, far from libraries, far from the noise of crowds. You step away from the broken columns. A lone owl hoots in the distance. The ruins sigh and fold their secrets back into stone. The broken stones and owl's cry slip behind you as your feet find the ruts of an old caravan road, dusty, sun-baked, and worn smooth by countless souls before yours. Here on paths that snake from Ionian coasts to Persian plains, the traveling teachers drift. Itinerant philosophers, scribes, and half-welcome prophets who carried Greek ideas far beyond marble courtyards and city walls. You see them now, thin figures wrapped in simple cloaks, sandals crusted with road grit, scrolls strapped tight in leather satchels. They're not the polished orators of Athens, nor the secret initiates of mystery cults. They're dusty thinkers who traded classrooms for open skies, turning inns and crossroads into their lecture halls. One fact: these wandering sophists and teachers helped spread Greek thought eastward across Asia Minor into Persia, even brushing the edges of India. Historians still debate how much was truly absorbed by local cultures, or whether these traveling minds were mostly just curiosity sideshows at royal courts and merchant fairs. Picture one stopping at a roadside inn as dusk settles. He unfurls a tiny fragment of Plato's dialogues for an audience of merchants and camel drivers who chew figs and scratch their beards, half listening between trade talk. A boy peeks in through the doorway, wide-eyed at the strange words about virtue and the soul. By morning, the teacher is gone, leaving behind nothing but a few lines echoing between gossip and rumor. Quirky detail: some traveling philosophers doubled as entertainers, storytellers, who blended folk tales with lessons on ethics or logic. They might earn a cup of watered wine or a place by the fire in return for spinning stories of Socratic puzzles and half-remembered riddles. A few even carried wax tablets and charcoal sketching geometric proofs on tavern floors slick with spilled wine. Step off the road for a moment. Imagine a tiny classroom under a fig tree where a teacher balances a tablet on his knee while goats graze nearby. His students are traders nomads, the occasional local scribe, hungry for new tricks to impress the village elders. They might forget the theorem by tomorrow, but the seeds of the idea drift on eastward, with caravans southward, with ships hugging the Red Sea's salt crust. These travelers were the thin threads binding Greek minds to new places, sometimes welcomed, sometimes chased away for heresy or simple annoyance. Some scribbled their lessons on scraps that ended up in foreign libraries. Others left no trace but a rumor that somewhere far from Athens, a shepherd once debated the shape of the soul under a canopy of stars. Historians still argue, did this wandering wisdom truly shape Eastern thought, or was it absorbed, digested, and reborn as something else entirely? Zoroastrian priests in Persia traded ideas with Greek emissaries. Buddhist monks along the Silk Road echoed philosophical riddles, not unlike Socratic puzzles. But was this an exchange, or just a trickle of passing travelers? You stand by the road's edge now, the last of the day's heat rising in shimmering waves from sun-baked stones. A donkey brays in the distance. Somewhere ahead, the road forks one path toward the Nile's green promise, another deeper into Persia's vast empires. Wherever they went, these traveling teachers carried not just words, but the idea that wisdom wasn't chained to marble columns or city assemblies. It could walk, breathe, dust, linger in roadside inns, where philosophy drifted like campfire smoke, impossible to hold, but impossible to forget completely. You brush road dust from your sleeve. Ahead, the crossroads of Egypt beckon, where Greek, Jewish, and Egyptian thought brewed together under Alexandria's watchful lighthouse. The traveling teachers fade behind you, footsteps swallowed by drifting sand and fading echoes of lessons half remembered. The desert road winds you toward a shimmering edge where sand softens into fertile green, an ancient threshold where Greek minds met Egypt's mysteries beneath Alexandria's towering lighthouse. This was the crossroads of Egypt, where scrolls, scroll hoarders, and restless thinkers collided in sunlit courtyards and candlelit halls to blend Greek, Jewish, and Egyptian thought into something the old Athenians could hardly have imagined. Picture Alexandria at its height, not just marble columns and scholarly debates, but bustling docks unloading papyrus bales from Nile barges, spices from Arabia, scrolls smuggled from every port the Ptolemies could reach. You stand among chatter in a dozen languages, Greek mingled with Hebrew, Aramaic, Demotic, Egyptian, even scraps of Persian and Phoenician for good measure. One fact: the famed library of Alexandria sat next door to the Mouseion, a temple to the Muses that served as the world's first known research institute. Historians still argue whether its scholars were priests in disguise or philosophers who treated the divine as another curiosity to catalog. Quirky detail: the Mouseion scholars were so devoted to knowledge that rumor says they dissected animals, and perhaps even humans, just to map out anatomy for medical scrolls. Imagine a priestly scholar, hunched over papyrus at dawn reed pen, scratching new words for organs no polite Athenian would ever mention aloud. But Alexandria's real marvel was how it tangled ideas together. Jewish scholars here translated Hebrew scripture into Greek for the first time, creating the Septuagint, a monumental work that spread Jewish philosophy far beyond its homeland. Egyptian priests whispered old rituals to curious Greeks who scribbled notes for their next lecture back in Athens. Hermetic texts, half Greek and half Egyptian, teased at a hidden cosmic order part, magic part, math, part mystical dream work. Wander through the city's crooked streets, and you might overhear a scribe reciting Plato by day and slipping into a temple at night to consult a priest of Isis. Lines blurred in Alexandria between science and sorcery, philosophy and cult. Historians still debate, was this syncretism a true meeting of minds, or a polite borrowing of costumes to impress kings and Roman governors hungry for exotic wisdom? You slip into a shady courtyard, now where Greek philosophers argue under fig trees, while Egyptian astrologers measure shadows against the stone. Maybe you hear whispers about the sacred ibis, the god Thoth, the hidden correspondences between stars above and veins below. In these hushed conversations, Greek rationalism tangled with Egyptian ritual, an unlikely marriage that seeded what would become early alchemy Gnosticism and the first stirrings of mystic schools that outlasted empires. Pause by the harbor at dusk, watching the lighthouse flame flicker. Its beam sweeps the dark sea like a scholar's lantern, searching the past for half-lost truths. Below deck on a departing ship, you imagine crates stuffed with scrolls, copies destined for other libraries, other minds, other crossroads, where old ideas would be broken apart and reborn in new tongues. Alexandria reminds you that ideas like people migrate best when borders blur. What started in Ionian seaside schools found new voices here. Voices that chanted prayers, in Hebrew, scribbled cosmic equations in Greek, and whispered old Egyptian secrets into fresh ears, eager for wonder. You stand a moment longer in the courtyard's cool shadows. The city hums with layered voices past and future myth and reason, the promise that every borrowed thought can sprout new leaves in unexpected gardens. You step back into the swirl of incense and brine, ready to follow these drifting ideas eastward, where Persian fires and Buddhist prayers wait to reshape Greek whispers all over again. The warm breath of Alexandria's crossroads fades as you drift inland, where sand dunes roll like frozen waves into the vastness of the Persian plateau. Here, under the watchful stars of ancient Persia, Greek minds met fires that never died, sacred flames, tended by Zoroastrian priests, whose rituals and riddles would echo back into the Hellenistic world in ways the old Athenians never saw coming. Picture yourself near one of these fire temples at dusk. The air smells of burning sandalwood and crisp desert wind. Inside robed priests chant in Avestan, their ancient tongue tending a flame believed to be the purest link between this world and the divine. Somewhere nearby, a Greek emissary scribbles notes by flickering lamplight, wide-eyed at doctrines older than Plato's neat syllogisms. One fact: as Alexander's conquests pushed Greek ideas into Persia, they didn't just overwrite local traditions. They tangled with Zoroastrian concepts of cosmic dualism, light versus darkness, truth versus lie. Historians still argue how deeply Persian ideas bent Greek thought. In return, did they color Stoicism's obsession with moral order, or leave their mark in later mystical sects that bloomed far from Athens's tidy debates? Quirky detail. Some scholars think Persian magi, the priests who read the stars and guarded holy flames, inspired Greek fascination with magicy itself. Tales of magi drifted westward, half wrapped in rumor. Were they philosophers, sorcerers, charlatans, or all three in a single candlelit robe? Now imagine a Greek philosopher, perhaps a disciple of Aristotle, or an exiled sophist seated cross-legged near the fire, quizzing a magus about the nature of the soul. Did it walk through realms of light and shadow after death? Could moral choice burn away darkness like flame devours oil? Over a simple meal of bread and dates, they swap riddles about eternity under a sky strewn with more stars than any Athenian street could ever reveal. By dawn, the Greek has copied prayers into a battered notebook, his neat lines crowded by scribbled translations. Back west, he'll spin these riddles into lectures that confound students who've never seen a sacred flame or tasted desert wind. Some ideas will stick sprouting quietly inside the Stoic schools, or seeding cults that blend Persian ritual with Greek reason. Wander further into this mindscape. On royal roads that stitched Persia together, scrolls slipped from hand to hand, Greek, Aramaic, Old Persian, each a vein of thought pulsing under empires that rose and fell like dust storms. Historians still puzzle over how many of these scraps fed the bonfires of Hellenistic thinkers hungry for new metaphors. Fire as wisdom, duality as moral compass. The endless battle between order and chaos inked into scroll margins like hidden prayers. You step from the temple's warmth into the desert night. Behind you, the sacred flame crackles a tiny heartbeat of light that outlasted kings and conquerors. Ahead, caravans creak under the stars, bound east toward stranger frontiers. Greek words hide in saddlebags beside Persian tales, and the early whispers of yet another bridge, one that crosses into Buddhist realms, where new riddles wait under unfamiliar moons. You tighten your cloak against the chill feet, crunching on sand that once felt the sandals of magi and philosophers alike. Somewhere out here, under these ancient constellations, you sense the next truth waiting, that ideas know no borders, only crossroads where curious minds pause, just long enough to light each other's torches. The desert wind at your back carries you further east, past Persia's fire temples and royal roads, into valleys where the mountains crouch low, like silent monks. Here in forgotten rest stops along the Silk Road, you glimpse one of history's strangest bridges, where Greek philosophy rubbed shoulders with Buddhist thought under canopies of prayer flags fluttering in high mountain passes. Imagine it, a caravanserai. At dawn, snow melting off tiled roofs, incense drifting from a shrine, while camels grunt and shake their harness bells awake. A Greek-speaking merchant lounges by the fire, trading riddles about the soul's shape with a saffron-robed monk, fresh from Gandhara, a place where Greco-Buddhist statues still sit serenely, half smiling in marble robes, draped in styles borrowed from Athens. One fact: after Alexander's armies swept into India, Greek ideas didn't vanish. They lingered nested inside kingdoms like Bactria and Gandhara. There, Hellenistic kings minted coins with Zeus on one side and Buddhist stupas on the other. Historians still argue whether Greek thinkers genuinely absorbed Buddhist ideas about suffering and impermanence, or whether they simply sprinkled Eastern flavor onto Western debates like exotic spice on stale bread. Quirky detail: some Gandharan Buddhas wear togas, folded marble drapery, straight out of Athenian sculpture studios. Art historians call them Greco-Buddhist, a mashup where Greek realism softened into meditative calm. Look closely at their faces. Sometimes they wear faint half-smirks that feel oddly Socratic, as if they're about to ask you whether your mind is ever truly at rest. Picture a wandering teacher here. Call him Menander or Melinda, a king turned philosopher, or philosopher turned king. Scholars still argue which way round he leaned. His debates with Buddhist monks, captured in the Melindapanya, or questions of King Melinda, read like lost Socratic dialogues. Only the riddles twist through karma and rebirth instead of Plato's ideal forms. Sit with them by the fire, Menander scratching a geometric figure into the dust, the monk countering with parables of a flame passed from one candle to the next, each spark the same yet never the same. Camels shuffle in the courtyard. Somewhere, a bell rings from a distant stupa. A Greek syllogism meets a Buddhist koan, and somewhere in that hush, both make sense at least until the next question unravels it all. Trade routes wind on from here, scrolls tucked in saddlebags beside silk and pepper. Ideas slip between languages: Greek, Prakrit, Sanskrit, Chinese. Some lines survive as legends half remembered in monastery libraries perched on cliff faces. Others dissolve like footprints in snow. Historians still puzzle over how much survived the journey. Did the Greeks truly understand nirvana? Did Buddhist monks really read Aristotle? Maybe, maybe not. But in these mountain passes, where ox carts creaked over icy bridges, someone asked questions that never quite belonged to Athens alone. You sip a ghostly cup of tea by the caravan fire, feeling the flicker of candles hidden inside temples carved straight into rock. You imagine travelers bedding down under stars more vast than any Greek agora ever saw, stars that watch silently as thoughts cross borders, shift languages, slip into prayers, and shape new answers for old puzzles. Outside the caravanserai, the Silk Road unwinds further east, carrying Greek whispers past Himalayan snows and into China's scholar halls. But you pause here for now, warming your hands by the brazier, letting your thoughts wander with monks and philosophers who never stayed put long enough for their words to gather dust. When you stand again, the fire pops softly, sending up sparks, like fleeting ideas bright for a moment, then lost to the wind that calls you west again. Rome waits now, ready to take what Greece scattered and repackage it in marble and empire. For now, though, the last of the Buddha's smile lingers in your mind, serene and secretive, half Greek, half something else entirely. The last hush of Buddhist riddles fades as you turn your steps back west, where the roads grow straighter, the aqueducts taller, and the scrolls once carried by wandering Greeks find themselves repackaged under Rome's hard marble gaze. Here you stand, in the shadow of temples and forums, watching how the Roman absorption took Greek wisdom, every stray debate, every half-lost theorem, and bound it tight in Latin ink and imperial ambition. Picture a Roman senator at dawn pacing a colonnaded courtyard, draped in his toga, quoting Aristotle to a bored scribe while dictating new edicts for trade and taxes. Greek thought became Rome's Polish philosophy for dinner parties, Stoicism for generals, Epicurean, calm for poets, exiled far from polite company. If the Greeks asked why, the Romans asked, how can we use this one fact? Marcus Aurelius, Rome's philosopher-emperor, wrote his Meditations while on campaign wrestling, with Stoic ideas shaped by Greek teachers like Epictetus himself, once a slave. Historians still argue whether Marcus really lived by his calm inward counsel. Some say he did. Others suspect the daily grind of empire left him less tranquil than his ink suggests. Quirky detail. Roman aristocrats often kept busts of Greek philosophers in their libraries. Tiny marble heads, lined up, like moral guardians, above shelves of scrolls. A dinner guest might sip watered wine under the stony gaze of Plato and Socrates, careful to quote a line or two before the conversation slipped into gossip and politics. You wander through a villa, now mosaic floors, cool under your feet, air heavy with the scent of fig trees and fresh olive oil. In a corner, a tutor quizzes a senator's son on Euclid's geometry. Next door, a poet lifts a line straight from Hesiod, slips it into Latin verse, and polishes it to suit a Roman ear hungry for borrowed gravitas. Rome didn't just hoard Greek ideas, it repackaged them like marble statues looted from Corinth and shipped home to adorn imperial gardens. Old myths got Latin names. Old plays found new masks. Greek gods found themselves wearing Roman togas, answering to Jupiter and Mars instead of Zeus and Ares. Philosophy, too, was recast. Stoicism, now a manual for soldier emperors, and self-control on the battlefield. You pause under a portico. Listening to a whispered argument, is a Roman Stoic truly a Stoic? If he quotes Epictetus between giving orders to torch a rebellious village. Scholars still debate whether Rome's philosophical borrowings ran deep or were just fashionable armor for power-hungry men pretending to be wise. Yet not all was superficial. Some Roman minds truly inhaled Greek thought like incense. Seneca tutor to Nero tangled daily with Greek paradoxes about virtue and vice. Plotinus later on folded Platonic ideas into mystic Neoplatonism, a swirl of thought that would drift into Christian theology centuries later, dressed in fresh robes, but carrying the same Greek heartbeat. As you drift deeper into this marble world, imagine Roman scribes copying scrolls in candlelit corners. Greek words pressed into fresh Latin molds, read by lawyers, poets generals. Libraries rose in Ephesus, Ostia, even Londinium, little echoes of Athens hidden under Roman roofs. One last image, a Roman legionnaire far from home, scratches a line of Greek onto a wall in Britannia, proof that even at the cold edges of empire Greek whispers lingered under the tramp of hobnailed sandals. You step out from the villa's shade. Ahead lies darkness, a medieval hush, where scribes must guard what's left of these Greek-Roman scrolls through centuries of chaos and flickering candlelight. For now, Rome stands, steady, pretending ideas are marble, eternal, immovable. But you know better. Words wander, secrets slip through cracks, and the scribes wait in shadows to catch what falls through the empire's crumbling stones. The marble hush of Roman villas crumbles beneath your feet as you step into darker corridors, cold, damp, and echoing with the soft scratch of quills. Here in flickering candlelight, hidden manuscripts whisper through the dark ages, carried not by orators or emperors, but by patient scribes hunched over battered desks in drafty monasteries perched on remote hillsides. Picture it, a monk in a woolen robe, ink-stained fingers, trembling slightly in the chill as he copies Greek words he doesn't fully grasp. Outside, the wind howls through stone cloisters. Inside, the lamp sputters, threatening to swallow centuries of thought if it gutters out too soon. One fact: many Greek texts survived not in grand Roman libraries, but in monastic scriptoria scattered from Ireland's lonely abbeys to Byzantium's hidden chambers. Historians still argue how many works vanished for good when Rome's marble cracked and scrolls moldered in locked chests no one dared open. Quirky detail: some scribes smuggled pages under loose sleeves when warlords ransacked monasteries. A single fragment tucked into a boot or sewn inside a robe hem might be the only reason you know Aristotle's name today. What you learned as a neat chain of Western thought was often saved by candle smoke and secret pockets. You stand now at a rough wooden desk. Wax tablets stacked beside scraps of old parchment, some scraped clean and reused old ink faint beneath fresh lines. A half-frozen scribe dips his quill, blowing on his fingertips, whispering prayers that no drip of wax will smudge the precious lines. Sometimes these monks slip notes to each other in the margins. Tiny jokes about poor Latin, scribbled complaints about fleas or stale bread. Between dry lines of Plato, you might find a doodle of a cat or a snoring brother nodding off mid-sentence. Proof that this great chain of knowledge rested on ordinary shoulders who sometimes dreamed more of soup than syllogisms. You wander through a corridor lined with shelves. Here lie boxes of secrets, half-burned scrolls, fragile folios, codices, with clasps that squeak open like ancient coffins. Some contain Greek wisdom, filtered through Arabic translations, carried back west by traders and scholars who crisscrossed North Africa and Spain when Europe forgot what Athens once shouted from its rooftops. Historians still argue who deserves the real credit. Was it Irish monks copying crumbling texts, while Vikings lurked outside, or Islamic scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, translating and expanding Aristotle and Euclid before smuggling them back across the Mediterranean. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is the candle's soft glow as you peer over a monk's shoulder, watching him scratch out a perfect alpha or omega with deliberate care. Each letter, a rescue mission. Each sentence a gamble against rat's mildew, or the next lord who might torch the library for firewood. Outside the monastery walls, kings plot, empires rise and fall. But in here, time holds its breath. A single flickering flame guards centuries of thought from oblivion. You sense the hush of a vow these scribes aren't philosophers or mathematicians, yet their ink-stained sleeves stitch the past to your present more firmly than any marble column ever did. You slip quietly past the last rows of shelves, a phantom guest in this shadowed scriptorium. Ahead, dawn glows faint through an arrow-slit window. The scribes will rest soon, their eyes red backs, sore hands, black with ink. But they'll leave you one last gift, a fragile stack of Greek whispers ready to wake when the world wants to listen again. Outside, the winds shift. The monasteries fade behind you as you step into the bright hush of modern curiosity, where excavators dig scanners, hum, and new seekers wonder what secrets still lie buried beneath centuries of dust. You step out of the cold cloisters into a warmer breeze, one that hums with electric lights, soft beeps of scanners, and the muffled voices of archaeologists brushing dust from parchment once thought forever lost. This is where your drift ends for tonight in the hush of modern curiosity, where the last echoes of forgotten Greek schools still stir beneath your feet and flicker on digital screens. Picture it: a researcher hunched over a cracked papyrus in a quiet lab, fingertips gloved, breath held. A line of Greek, faint as a ghost, emerges under ultraviolet light, a scrap, maybe from a lost dialogue, maybe just a laundry list. But every mark is precious. What was once buried in ruins or smuggled in monks' sleeves now hums softly on cloud servers, waiting for someone like you to find it again. One fact: new fragments of Greek thought still appear where no one expects. In 1906, a shepherd stumbled across ancient scrolls stuffed in a jar in a Turkish cave, part of the Herculaneum Library, charred by Vesuvius, yet faintly legible with today's X-rays. Historians still debate whether these carbonized lumps might hide entire missing plays, letters, or even Aristotle's lost books. Quirky detail: some modern treasure hunters point radar at desert sand, hoping to spot hidden libraries buried by earthquakes or wrapped inside abandoned temples. Every so often, a faded inscription peeks out an awkward riddle, a snippet of a philosopher's joke, a line no one has heard in 2,000 years. Now imagine this: a graduate student nodding off in a chilly basement archive. Beside her hums a laptop glowing with digitized scrolls. She dreams perhaps of Heraclitus's river, or Hypatia's chalk dust swirling under starlight. She dreams of a half-burned word logos and wonders what argument it once ended or began. Historians argue whether all these scraps add up to something grand. Will we ever piece together the entire puzzle, or are we forever gathering crumbs under a table that burned long ago? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the beauty lies in the chase, the soft click of keys at 3 a.m., the brush of a finger across ancient ink that still clings to life, the thrill of asking questions no marble column could answer alone. You stand beside that student now, one foot in the ancient groves, where remote thinkers muttered about rivers, one foot in a humming lab, where algorithms peer into papyrus fibers. If you listen closely, You can hear the hush of Ionian waves, the echo of a Pythagorean hum, the rustle of Orphic hymns in moonlit groves. Beneath every city street, every library, shelf, every desert dune, maybe another Greek, thought waits, still buried, still warm with questions. You drift there in your mind, quiet as a shadow, content to wonder. The screen dims. The ancient ink sighs. For tonight, you've wandered far beyond Athens, through coasts and caves, temples and monasteries, until the line between past and dream softens like parchment under candlelight. May your thoughts flow as quietly and curiously as those old rivers, never the same stream twice. In that drifting hush, your mind slips from ancient rivers to echoing halls of marble, where debates flare like torches, voices clash like swords, and gods lean close to mortal riddles. Step closer now and see where these murmurs gather. Picture it, a marble hall perched above mortal worries, filled not with thunderous decrees, but the soft hum of quarreling voices. Robes brushing against polished floors, goblets clinking 1,000 philosophical dilemmas blooming under candlelight. Why did Zeus need to test Prometheus when he could just strike him down? Why did Hera invent new punishments when old grudges would do? The air smelled of burnt offerings and bruised egos, an endless debate club that never adjourned. Somewhere in the distance, a mortal whispered a prayer, unaware their gods were too busy debating the ethics of divine punishment to listen. You find yourself at the edge of the council chamber, where marble pillars reach skyward like frozen lightning bolts. Around you, the 12 Olympians lounge on thrones, carved with beasts and flowers symbols of their tangled domains. Zeus, gray-bearded and broad-shouldered, drums his fingers on a golden armrest. Beside him, Hera's eyes flicker with a knowing impatience that could crack granite. The council is in session, but you quickly learn there are no neat agendas here, only spirals of arguments that twist like ivy around the columns. You watch Ares, all restless muscle, and barely contained impulse slam his bronze spear into the marble floor. He insists the humans below need constant wars to keep them disciplined. Across from him, Athena, cool and composed, adjusts her owl-crested helmet and counters with words that cut sharper than any blade perhaps humans fight because the gods set such a poor example. Her calm sends a ripple of snickers down the line. Hermes, perched cross-legged atop his chair, flicks a coin into the air, betting with himself which insult will land first. A single historical truth anchors this swirl of chatter for the ancient Greeks. Their gods were mirrors, larger-than-life reflections of human flaws, virtues, and contradictions. While philosophers like Socrates and Plato debated virtue in dusty courtyards, these deities staged endless thought experiments in marble palaces. Some scholars argue this was mythology's secret job, giving the Greeks a playful, dangerous sandbox for moral puzzles. Did humans invent the gods to explain storms? Or did they craft Zeus and his kin to test their own tangled ideas about justice and free will? You shift your gaze to the far end of the hall, where Dionysus lounges with half-lidded eyes and a jug of wine. His laugh bubbles up when Apollo leans in to recite a prophecy so cryptic it sounds like a drunk poet's dare. Somewhere in that murmur is a question philosophers still chase. Does knowing the future help you avoid it? Or does it trap you in its vine-wrapped coils? A stray breeze carries whispers of olive groves and burning incense. Hermes leans over his voice, low and teasing, suggesting a new rule that no argument can last longer than a mortal lifetime. The others roll their eyes, but secretly they like the chaos. Prometheus, shackled by a memory of fire stolen and gifted, watches the council with a quiet smirk. He knows that once he outwitted Zeus himself, a divine debate turned rebellion that sparked the very age of reason in human hearts. Historians still argue whether these myths were meant to guide morality mock it, or simply soothe restless minds under the vast indifferent stars. Maybe they did all three. Maybe they do it still right here, as you linger among the gods' bickering. You feel the marble floor grow warm beneath your feet, as if their endless talk fuels the very stone. There's no rush here, no final verdict. Only the gentle tug of voices pulling you deeper into a place where the line between mortal and immortal logic dissolves in torchlight and soft laughter. A hush settles over the council, but it doesn't last. From a shadowed corner near the marble balustrade, Prometheus steps forward, his eyes flickering like coals that refuse to die out. You might expect a titan to roar like thunder or swing mountains like clubs, but Prometheus prefers quieter rebellions. He wins by thinking circles around thunderbolts. It begins with a memory of clay humans molded from earth and breath, fragile figures who shivered in caves while their creators sat warm on Olympus. Prometheus watches them from afar, these cold, hungry creatures who squint at the stars as if daring the sky to answer back. He pities them, or maybe he envies them. It depends on which old poet you believe. Some say Prometheus tricked Zeus not once, but twice first, by serving him bones wrapped in fat at the feast of Mecone, then by sneaking fire back to humankind when Zeus locked it away. Picture him on the slopes of Olympus' torch, hidden under his ragged cloak, each step down a risk of eternal torment. When the flame flickers to life in a human village, it's more than warmth. It's rebellion made tangible. A tiny defiance against divine monopoly. The crackle of logs is an argument in itself. Who truly deserves knowledge? Who decides what mortals may hold? A historical fact burns here too. Greek myths made Prometheus a stand-in for the price of progress. He is the reason ancient storytellers linked fire invention and punishment so tightly. Some historians still argue whether the tale hints at early Greeks' ambivalence toward technology. Was Prometheus a hero or a cautionary tale? A liberator or a reckless instigator who doomed humans to Zeus's cruel retaliation? Near his feet, a fox darts through underbrush flames, mirrored in its sly eyes. A quirky detail, but fitting foxes were sacred to Prometheus's cult followers in certain remote villages, a symbol of cunning and resilience. They say a fox never runs straight when it can zigzag, just like Prometheus never argued plain when a riddle would do. You stand beside him now, on a rocky outcrop, overlooking flickering hearths in the valley below. His chains haven't found him yet. The wind carries embers and the taste of defiance. He glances at you just once, as if to ask whether you'd trade comfort for rebellion, warmth for eternal punishment. And then he's gone, stepping back into the myth, leaving only questions smoldering in your mind. Somewhere Zeus stirs in his throne room, thunder brewing like an unwritten verdict. But for now, the fire crackles on, and you feel its heat echo through centuries of philosophers who still debate whether Prometheus made humanity free or forever bound us to struggle. A quick flutter of winged sandals marks the shift. You sense it before you see him. Hermes the trickster, the only god who can outtalk a titan and make it sound like a bedtime joke. He slips between shadows and torchlight, weaving through the pillars of Olympus as if the council chamber were his personal racetrack. Somewhere above Zeus sighs, because when Hermes shows up, rules become suggestions, and suggestions become punchlines. You catch a glimpse of his grin, before he flickers to another corner of your eye. He carries a caduceus, but tonight it's just a prop. His real tools are words sharpened like fish hooks. They say Hermes invented lying. The same day he invented the lyre, both require nimble fingers and a tune people can't resist humming. On his first day alive, he stole Apollo's cattle, reversed their hooves to trick the tracks, and then serenaded his brother into forgiving him. It's an old fact that makes philosophers nod knowingly. Deceit is easiest when you dress it in music. A flicker of silver Hermes slips a coin between your fingers, a gift, or maybe a bribe. In some stories, that same coin would ferry souls to Hades. In others, it would buy off a guard. Either way, it reminds you that barter trade and language all belong to this wiry god who never stands still long enough for punishment to catch up. A quirkier detail emerges in whispers. Certain ancient merchants carved tiny wings on their sandals to curry favor before risky voyages. If your cargo made it to port without pirates, maybe Hermes had flown ahead to confuse the storms. Scholars still argue whether these rituals honored the god or were just practical superstition. After all, belief has always been the trickster's playground. He circles you now, draping stories over your shoulders like a cloak stitched with lies, half-truths, and clever loopholes. Every wink dares you to wonder if the line between honest trade and cunning theft ever really existed. Beneath Olympus's grand marble order, there's always this undercurrent, the trickster's laughter threading through deals diplomacy and words that bend reality. Somewhere, a mortal scribe scratches his quill, inspired by Hermes, to draft the first speech full of rhetorical traps. The breeze tastes of olive oil and fresh parchment. The council watches half annoyed, half entertained, because no argument on Olympus ever stays tidy once Hermes steps in. You follow the flutter of wings, a hush of sandals skimming marble floors. The trickster god fades into the echo of your footsteps, leaving only the riddle. What good is a rule if no one remembers how to break it? A hush heavier than thunder settles in the hall. Hermes' laughter fades, replaced by the cold edge of strategy. You find yourself standing near Athena, now the goddess whose armor never clinks, yet weighs more than any bronze shield could. She doesn't pace or posture. She simply waits for foolishness to exhaust itself, then slices it apart with logic honed sharper than Ares' finest blade. Ares stands across from her, shifting restlessly, a war god, bristling for a fight no one's declared yet. His helmet gleams like spilled blood in torchlight. His spear scratches tiny gouges into the marble. He scowls, claiming that mortals crave battle, that strength settles all debates faster than words. Athena only lifts an eyebrow, her owl perched silent on her shoulder, and lets the silence gut him better than any spear ever could. You can almost smell the tension olive oil on polished armor sweat under Ares' leather straps, the faint resin of Athena's olive wreaths. In one version of their feud, they fought side by side at Troy, he the storm, she the strategy that guides it. Yet every myth reminds you that Athena never needed brute force to win. She invented cunning negotiation, the sharp turn of an argument that makes an enemy defeat himself before he knows he's lost. Historians still debate whether Athena's myths reflect an ancient Greek respect for reason over violence, or a quiet fear that even the wisest plans crumble when rage arrives. In a city like Athens, named for her philosophers, found sanctuary under her patronage. They sat in shaded groves to question the very things Ares would smash justice, loyalty, sacrifice. Some say it was her quiet war on his chaos that birthed philosophy itself, a rumor that still echoes down classroom hallways. A quirk, hidden in the folds of her myth, Athena sprang fully formed from Zeus's forehead, a headache turned battle plan. She never had a mother, just a father's headache, and an entire city's devotion. It makes you wonder if ideas always bloom from pain cracked open. She moves now, just a fraction closer to Ares, no louder than a drifting breeze. Her voice slices through his thunder. No shouting, no brute show, just questions he can't answer without admitting she's already won. Somewhere in the shadows, the other gods lean in, not for bloodshed, but for the thrill of an argument that outlasts any battlefield. You stand there too, between spear tip and owl feather, and feel the pull of two ancient truths that wisdom must wrestle with impulse, and that somewhere between them, humans decide what wars are worth fighting. A flicker of torchlight catches on her bronze breastplate. The echo of distant war drums fades behind the soft rustle of parchment, plans drawn in secret words poised to outlive the clash of iron. Athena turns her eyes, meeting yours just once, as if to remind you that the sharpest blade you carry is hidden behind your teeth. A hush follows Athena's measured words, but soon another voice rises, a softer one that curls through the marble hall like smoke from a sacred fire. You follow it to where Apollo stands golden, and calm the god whose bright prophecies hide darker riddles underneath. He holds a laurel branch instead of a sword, but the weight of his words can split kingdoms. Imagine Delphi at dawn, cold mountain air, a line of pilgrims clutching coins and questions. They wait for the Pythia Apollo's mouthpiece to inhale sweet bay leaves and speak truths so twisted they tie mortals in knots for decades. The god of the sun music and reason his oracles speak in riddles, forcing kings and beggars alike to untangle the future word by word. A single historical fact glows here like temple embers. The oracle of Delphi really existed for centuries, drawing rulers from every corner of Greece. Decisions of war, treaties, marriages all turned on a sentence half buried in metaphor. Historians still argue whether these cryptic prophecies were clever mind games by temple priests or truly Apollo's divine wisdom made flesh. Either way, people believed. And belief has always been the sharpest knife tucked into a prophecy's velvet sheath. A quirky twist hides in the rituals. Before a prophecy, the Pythia would bathe in the Castalian spring, chew laurel leaves, and sometimes inhale fumes from a sacred chasm. Some say it was all for show. Others think the gas made her visions swirl with mystery and perhaps poison. No matter the cause, her voice carried Apollo's riddles to trembling ears, who wanted only certainty and got only more questions. You stand behind the Pythia, now watching the god himself lean close to whisper in her ear. His fingers brush the laurel crown, his eyes bright as dawn over olive groves. You can almost hear what he says, but the words twist away before they reach your mind. Maybe that's the point. Answers never given freely, truth, always wrapped in paradox. Somewhere nearby, Hermes chuckles at the chaos it causes, while Athena nods in cold approval. Nothing keeps mortals sharp like a puzzle they can't solve. And Ares, he scowls at any future that can't be punched into submission. You drift closer to Apollo, noticing how his calm is its own kind of power. He doesn't need armies or chains, just a question that echoes through your thoughts long after his temple fades into starlight. In that soft space where riddles live, you realize why the Greeks trusted a god who offered neither yes nor no, only the thrill of wondering what if. A gentle tremor shakes the marble floor, a laugh deep and slurred with warmth spills across the council like spilt wine. Dionysus has arrived late as always, but never unwelcome. You feel it in the air before you see him. A sweetness of crushed grapes, the soft fizz of fermenting, must a hint of chaos swirling behind his smile. He drapes himself across a low-thrown ivy tangled in his hair robes, stained with purple like a careless painter's tunic. Mortals call him the god of wine, but to the Greeks, he was much more a puzzle, wrapped in a party, a debate carried on waves of ecstatic dance and half-whispered secrets. While Apollo offered riddles from polished marble, Dionysus whispered them in drunken songs under moonlit vines. You watch him tilt a goblet until it spills onto the marble. No scolding, no worry, just the council rolling their eyes as a chorus of nymphs giggles from the shadows. A historical fact slides into place here. Ancient Greeks really did hold Dionysian festivals, raucous days-long feasts where wine flowed like river water and reason drowned in ritual. The point wasn't just indulgence, but a kind of sacred madness, an argument for what humans are when the masks slip and the mind loosens its iron grip. Some scholars still argue whether these rites were simple revelry or something deeper, a door cracked open to test the edges of control. Plato himself sniffed at Dionysus, yet even he wondered if drunken abandon freed truths no sober tongue could bear to speak. Imagine it a peasant and a noble dancing side-by-side boundaries, gone debating life's worth between gulps of sweet red wine. A quirky detail drifts in followers of Dionysus. The Maenads often danced barefoot in the frost, their feet purple with chill and spilled wine alike. They claimed the cold kept them awake enough to remember the arguments they shouted into the dark woods. What is freedom? Who decides when madness becomes wisdom? Back in the council, Dionysus leans forward, eyes half closed as if reading your mind. He asks nothing outright. Instead, he pours another cup, offering you a sip of forgetfulness and philosophy, tangled in one swallow. Around you, the other gods fall quiet, as if waiting to see whether you'll drink. Somewhere behind him, Hermes grins. Athena pretends not to watch, and Apollo's laurel crown glows faintly in the torchlight. The council's marble pillars seem to sway, not from earthquake, but from the simple truth that even the most rigid minds can bend in Dionysus's company. And so you stand on the brink of sense and surrender, wondering how much of your own logic you'd trade for a night of unbridled questions under the same moon the Greeks once sang to. Maybe that's the debate that never ends. When does a mind loosen its grip too far, and who's brave enough to find out? The wine's warmth lingers in your veins as the council's torchlight flickers into deeper shadows. Behind the merriment, another door creaks open, a darker, quieter passage that leads you to the Orphic mysteries. Here, arguments aren't shouted across marble floors or spilled from drunken lips. They're whispered in torchlit caves, written on scraps of lead, murmured between the living and the dead. You stand at the mouth of a cavern draped in vines and mist. A faint chant echoes from somewhere inside, words older than any council decree. Orpheus, poet and prophet, stands at the heart of it, all the mortal, who sang so sweetly he charmed even Hades for a heartbeat. His followers believed music wasn't just art, but a key unlocking riddles about life-death and the endless cycle between. A single historical fact hums here. The Orphic cults were real small secretive groups scattered across the Greek world. They carried scraps of myth, rewritten as philosophical codes, promising initiates a chance to escape the usual cosmic hamster wheel of rebirth. Instead of just worshiping Dionysus at his loudest, they searched for him, at his quietest a god who dies and returns mirroring the soul's own hoped-for escape. A quirky twist rustles the parchment of history. Orphic believers buried their dead with thin gold tablets engraved with instructions for the underworld, like cosmic cheat sheets for arguing your way past Persephone's gatekeepers. Imagine clutching a tiny map to eternity on your tongue as you slip into the dark. Some historians still argue whether Orphism was a protest movement, a mystical fringe cult, or an early prototype for Greek philosophy itself. After all, if the gods were busy bickering on Olympus, who better to slip beneath them and ask quieter questions about truth, suffering, and rebirth? Inside the cavern, shadows dance like living riddles. The scent of burnt resin and myrtle drifts around you. Somewhere deeper in the dark, a circle of initiates hums Orpheus's name, each note a soft protest against forgetting a promise that somewhere in the noise of divine debates, the secret truth waits in a whispered song. You drift closer to the circle, your feet brushing cold stone. A soft voice invites you to listen harder, to wonder whether all these myths were masks for something even older, a simple human hope that the soul might outwit death if only it learns the right question to ask. Behind you, the council still murmurs and quarrels above ground, but here below, the argument is different. It hums like a heartbeat buried under centuries of wine war and wise words waiting for ears soft enough to hear it. You leave the dark hum of the Orphic cave and step back into the pale dawn of mortal deeds, a dawn that gleams off bronze shields and lion pelts. Here stands Heracles, broad as a mountain, sweat gleaming on his arms, as he hefts a club that could splinter an oak with one swing. You'd think brute strength leaves no room for argument, but Heracles' legend hides puzzles sharper than his arrows. 12 tasks, 12 riddles disguised as labors, each one a debate between mortal will and divine whim. Who decides what counts as heroism? Is it the lion's death, the hydra's head sliced and seared, the stable's filth washed clean, or the fact that each victory left Heracles more tangled in Zeus's endless tests? One solid fact flexes its muscle here. Ancient storytellers knew Heracles as more than a monster slayer. He was a cautionary knot of glory and guilt. His labors weren't just punishments for rage. They were philosophical traps, forcing him to wrestle beasts and moral paradoxes alike. Was he truly free if every triumph chained him tighter to the gods' fickle favor? A quirky footnote stomps through his myths like a stray hoof after slaying the Erymanthian boar. Heracles carried the beast back alive, dangling over his shoulders. Some versions claim it squealed so terribly that the king who demanded the task hid in a jar just to muffle the argument echoing through its tusks. Even monsters, it seems, get the last word. Historians still argue whether these tasks taught the Greeks to admire brute force or fear the trap of endless penance. Maybe both. Maybe Heracles became philosophy's muscle-bound shadow proof that ethics aren't just theories spun in marble courtyards, but sweat and scars pressed into mortal flesh. You walk with him now along a narrow mountain pass. Each footprint crushes wild time under your feet. Behind you lies the Nemean lion's lair. Ahead, the Augean stables stink under a burning sun. Heracles doesn't speak much, words slip through him like river water. Yet every grunt and swing of his club argues a bigger point, that sometimes the most heroic debate is with your own shadow. Ares watches from Olympus, amused at this living battering ram. Athena somewhere above files every swing into a quiet ledger of lessened strength, can solve puzzles, but it rarely writes the riddle's ending. Hermes bets coins on whether the next task will break Heracles or forge him sharper still, and you watching the sweat drip onto dusty stones, Wonder if maybe every impossible task you face is its own sly argument. A test, a chance to find out which chains you'll break and which you'll polish like trophies. The road grows colder now, the air damp as you descend from Heracles' sun-baked plains into the hush of the underworld's edge. It's here beyond the last flicker of daylight that Hades waits, more judge than tyrant, more negotiator than monster. The gods above thunder and bicker for all to see. But down here, every debate whispers through the dark like coins slipping from palm to palm. You stand at the mouth of his realm, half hidden behind asphodel and drifting mists. Unlike Zeus's flashy thunder or Ares' rattling spears, Hades governs with a glance, a bargain, a contract inked in shadows. He doesn't shout. He simply waits until the desperate find him. Heroes' lovers, cheats each ready to plead for another heartbeat. One stone-hard fact holds true. Ancient Greeks buried their dead, with coins under the tongue payment for Charon's ferry across the Styx. A tiny fee for passage, a proof that even in death, the rules of transaction bound mortal souls tight. Some claim these myths grew from early burial customs. Others believe they planted the seeds for later legal codes, a gentle echo of how the living argued contracts above ground. A quirky detail drifts like a wisp from some lesser-known myth. Hades once made a bet with Sisyphus. If the king could outwit death, he'd be free. Of course, Sisyphus did twice, some say, only to find himself rolling that stone uphill forever. A punishment, yes, but also a cosmic joke, the first and last lawyer forever stuck with a case he can never close. Historians still argue whether Hades was truly cruel or simply fairer than his thunder-hurling brother. After all, the underworld didn't care about rank or beauty, only about the promises you kept or broke while your heart still beat. Mortals feared him, yet he ruled without spectacle, a quiet reminder that death is the only contract no argument can void. You move deeper into this shadow court, past thin streams of souls who shuffle in silence, each clutching the coin that bought their final crossing. Somewhere, Persephone drifts by half springtime bloom, half winter frost. Her presence softens the granite edges of her husband's bargains, proof that even here, a flicker of paradox endures. Nearby, Hermes flits at the border, the only god who travels freely between realms. He nods to you, a reminder that not all deals end badly. Some simply change shape, whispered from mortal law scrolls to whispered prayers beneath a stone slab. You feel the marble council hall far above your head, where Zeus still lectures about order and fate. But here below, the olive roots and funeral pyres, the true argument hums like a heartbeat. What is fair? Who decides the price? And does paying it really close the case? A hush of wings behind you. The Styx ripples ahead. You stand on its bank with a single coin tucked under your tongue, just in case the next question needs answering in the dark. When you surface from the hush of Hades' riverbank, you find yourself back in the olive groves of the mortal world, where myths slip into children's ears like lullabies and grow into lessons that outlast marble temples. The flickering torchlight of Olympus may blind, but it's here, by the warmth of simple hearths, that mythic morals carve themselves into mortal bones. Picture an old woman at a village gate spinning wool as she spins stories for a circle of drowsy children. She weaves tales of Icarus who flew too high, Midas who learned that greed poisons gold, Pandora who cracked open curiosity's box and found hope hiding beneath ruin. Each tale is an argument folded into a bedtime warning test. The gods, if you dare but know, the price might follow you home. One solid fact hums beneath this fireside chorus. Greek myths weren't dusty scrolls locked in temples. They were oral debates carried through generations. Long before Socrates asked pointed questions in sunlit courtyards, grandmothers and traveling bards asked quieter ones by lamplight. How should we live? What makes us noble? When does pride tip into ruin? A quirky shard of this oral tradition lingers in a faded scrap of pottery found buried in an attic in Athens, scribbled with a joke about Zeus cheating at dice. Even in throwaway scribbles, the people shaped their gods to be flawed mirrors of themselves. The question was never whether the gods were perfect, but whether their flaws could teach mortals to sharpen their own muddled morals. Historians still argue whether these myths were truly moral lessons or simply entertainment for long winter nights, maybe both. Maybe every cautionary tale was a secret lesson tucked inside a monster's roar, or a nymph's soft warning. Maybe when Socrates asked, "What is virtue?" he only rephrased what old tales had always whispered. Test your courage, mind, your hubris, weigh your choices carefully, because no god, no matter how loud his thunder, will fix what your own pride breaks. You stand now, by that village gate, the ghost of the council's marble pillars far behind you. The old woman glances up from her, spinning her eyes, glinting like coals under ash. She asks no questions outright, but her tales leave you drifting in silent thought, wondering which fable your own life resembles most. In the distance, a donkey brays. An olive branch creaks in the night breeze. You feel the thin line that ties these fireside parables to the grand debates overhead, a single thread of logic and irony that binds divine gossip to human conscience. You follow it like a breadcrumb trail through shadows and torchlight, ready for the next riddle to slip past your lips when sleep finally finds you. You feel the warm flicker of the village hearth fade behind you as the myth drifts upward again, back to the throne room of Olympus, where Zeus reclines among clouds and thunderheads, his brow creased in perpetual judgment. If you thought the king of the gods only wielded raw power, think again. His favorite weapon might just be the trial. You stand by his colossal throne, gold eagle-feathered, humming with static. At his feet, lesser gods shuffle petitions, half-finished schemes, prayers from mortals desperate for favor or revenge. But Zeus prefers puzzles. He tests loyalty by betrayal, punishes hubris with serpentine justice, and twists fate's threads until mortals and immortals alike can't tell who's to blame when the loom jams. A single historical thread flashes here like lightning across a stormy sky. Greek playwrights loved putting Zeus on trial, sometimes, literally, sometimes, in whispered side plots. His fickle justice, his punishments that stretched over generations, became the backdrop for tragedies that taught audiences how slippery justice can be when wielded by those above it. One quirky crackle of irony, even Zeus himself couldn't always escape the courtroom. In older myths, he stood accused by Hera for unfaithfulness so often that their marital spats read like comedic law briefs, pages of accusations, denials, cosmic reconciliations staged in the same breath. Some say Hera's endless vendettas were ancient reminders that power invites accountability no matter how many thunderbolts you hoard. Historians still argue whether Zeus's trials were moral stage plays or sly commentaries on mortal kings who claimed divine right. Did the Greeks truly fear Zeus's wrath, or did they poke fun at the absurdity of absolute power masked as cosmic law? Maybe both. Maybe that's why we still read those tragedies today, hoping for verdicts that never quite come. You step closer to the throne, feeling the hairs on your arms lift in the electric air. Zeus glances sideways, bored yet watchful, like a judge who knows no final gavel ever really falls. Somewhere below, Prometheus strains against his chains. Heracles labors in the distance, mortals squabble over stolen fire and broken oaths, proof that Zeus's courtroom never truly closes. Hermes flips a coin at the edge of the dais, betting which mortal folly will amuse the king next. Athena scribbles a silent note on a bronze tablet, ready to challenge the next ruling with a single sharp question. You stand amid it all thunder, rumbling softly in your bones, realizing this immortal trial isn't about guilt or innocence, but the endless human hunger to test fate's rules. A low growl of distant storms reminds you that somewhere, some petitioner is always on the verge of asking Zeus for mercy or tricking him into granting it by accident. And just maybe, that soft thunder is your own heartbeat, wondering if you stood trial here. What would your defense be when the lightning comes? The thunder fades like a yawn at dawn, and you drift downward again, away from Zeus's electric court to a place softer, greener, where mortal philosophers found metaphors tucked under mossy stones and in the laughter of hidden streams. Here, in the hush of woods and sun-dappled glades, the nymphs linger neither fully divine nor fully mortal, but something in between living symbols, for arguments the Greeks were still learning to speak aloud. You find yourself by a trickling spring. Light scatters across smooth rocks, where naiads recline water nymphs, who tease shepherds with glimpses of white ankles and riddles that drift through reeds like secrets half heard in dreams. In these sylvan corners, human thinkers came to test ideas too big for the marble agora. What does it mean to belong to nature yet stand apart? When does desire blur into destruction? One historical truth shimmers here like sunlight on water. Greek philosophers loved the nymphs, not just for their beauty, but for their slipperiness as metaphors. Nymphs turned arguments about human nature into living puzzles. They were temptation and restraint, wilderness and civility, all braided into a single shimmering myth. A quirky aside rustles through the leaves. In some rustic shrines, local villagers left tiny clay models of nymphs hidden under tree roots. They believed these figurines could soothe tempers and calm storms, little hush-money offerings for nature spirits easily offended by loud debates or carelessly spilled wine. Scholars still argue whether these stories were rustic superstition or sly philosophical stand-ins. Plato himself, it's said, retreated to a grove sacred to the nymphs when drafting some of his dialogues, half hoping the rustle of leaves would whisper answers Socratic logic couldn't pin down. A reminder that sometimes the best arguments come not from marble steps, but from the hush of woods, where words grow slippery as fish. You linger by the spring's edge. A single nymph drifts closer hair, streaming like river grass voice, soft as rainfall on an ancient roof tile. She says nothing outright yet. You sense a question in her glance when you argue with yourself who wins, the voice that stays rooted in your own mind, or the one that slips away to dream among reeds and shadows. Somewhere far above the marble pillars of Olympus loom, but here under willow branches, philosophy feels older than gods. You dip your fingers in the spring cool clear and imagine all the old debates dissolving into ripples that drift past rocks and roots, carrying your questions downstream to whoever listens next. A breeze brushes your cheek. You stand, leaving the nymphs to their quiet laughter, and carry their whispered paradox with you, that every argument about nature begins in the wild place within your own chest. The whisper of the nymphs fades into the hush of the hills, but you don't stray far, because in the clearing ahead, the wildness doesn't soften. It sharpens. There, half hidden in brambles and sun-dappled rocks, Pan waits, half man, half goat, all paradox. You'd expect him to bleat and run at the rustle of your steps, but Pan is no shy forest dweller tonight. He stands at the edge of the glade like a riddle with hooves. His pipes hang loose around his neck, reeds bound in twine, ready to summon melodies that make shepherds drop their crooks and mortals forget every tidy syllogism they've ever rehearsed. If Hermes is trickery and Athena is logic, then Pan is the puzzle of fear itself, raw, untamed, impossible to reason away. One solid fact prances through the thicket. The word panic comes straight from him. Pan the sudden terror that grips the heart when the woods grow too still or the mind too loud. Ancient soldiers feared his sudden shout in moonlit passes a god who didn't swing spears but bent men to their knees with dread alone. No sword needed just a gust of wind through hollow reeds. A quirky twist curls behind his goatish grin. Pan was one of the few gods said to have died. Some scraps of rumor claim sailors heard the news, shouted across waves, "Great Pan is dead." Yet the forests kept trembling with his laughter, proof that maybe a good paradox never truly goes quiet. Historians still argue whether this death was a joke, a misunderstood omen, or an early Christian dig at old pagan spirits refusing to fade politely. Pan catches your eye now, nostrils flaring as if sniffing out your hidden fears. The meadow hushes around him, every cricket pausing mid-song. Here is a god who reminds philosophers that some questions can't be boxed inside neat syllogisms. Some truths start with a sudden jolt in the chest, a heartbeat gone feral. He lifts his pipes to his lips and breathes out a melody that stirs the branches overhead. You sense why old thinkers wandered into wild glens to wrestle thoughts bigger than temples could hold. Logic cracks here replaced by bramble-scratched truths, and the awareness that your mind is never as tame as you pretend. You stand still as the tune trickles through you, stirring old echoes arguments you've whispered at midnight, doubts you've shushed at dawn. Pan's paradox pulses in your blood. Now that fear can be a teacher, a trickster, an uninvited guest who shoves you deeper into your own thicket of questions. Somewhere behind you, the Council of Gods mutters over half-settled debates. But here in Pan's meadow, the only verdict that matters is the one you face when the underbrush rustles at your back, and you ask yourself, why am I afraid? And what does that fear want me to learn? Pan's pipes fade into the hush of dusk, leaving behind a tremor in the reeds, a reminder that fear and wonder share the same hollow in the human chest. You drift onward, deeper into the forest of the mind, where echoes carry old stories that loop back on themselves. There, by a quiet pool, fringed with tall grass and drifting blossoms, you find two figures who remind you that the sharpest arguments sometimes bloom in silence, Echo and Narcissus. The pool is glass still tonight, a mirror for moonlight and half-forgotten questions. Echo lingers at its edge, lips parted her voice, stolen by Hera's spite long ago. She repeats what she hears, nothing more, an endless argument with the air itself. Somewhere nearby, Narcissus kneels, entranced not by Echo's words, but by the perfect reflection that traps him like a thought circling its own logic. A single fact floats here like a lily on dark water. The myth of Echo and Narcissus was a favorite of Roman poets and later philosophers who saw in it a fable about identity, how the mind can bend inward until it loses the world entirely. Echo's curse makes her an unwilling philosopher's mirror, all reflection, no argument of her own. Narcissus is her opposite, so absorbed in self-examination that the wider river of life slips by unnoticed. A quirk drifts in through the rushes. In some old versions, Echo's forest is so thick with vines that her voice bounces for miles, carrying her borrowed syllables far beyond any mortal's grasp. She becomes nature's echo chamber proof that questions shouted into the wild always come back twisted, but still waiting for answers. Historians still argue whether these two were moral warnings, tragic love notes, or secret nods at the oldest philosophical itch. Who are you when no one's there to reflect you back? What happens when the mind stares at itself too long, drowning in its own image? You kneel beside Narcissus now. His eyes flick up at you once, just enough to acknowledge your presence before flicking back to the pool's glassy lie. Echo rustles behind you, her borrowed voice brushing your ear. Are you still there? Still there? There you glance into the water and see your own face shimmering beside Narcissus's. For a heartbeat, the myth feels like your own, an argument you've repeated in secret. Am I what I see, or what echoes back when I speak? Somewhere behind the trees, Hermes laughs softly. Even the trickster can't bend this riddle. Even Athena's sharpest logic fails to cut its knot. The pool stays still. Echo hums her borrowed syllables into the night. And you stand between them, reflection and reverberation, caught in the same timeless puzzle that philosophers still fail to drain dry. A ripple disturbs the surface wind, or maybe your own doubt, stirring beneath thought's calm mask. You stand and step back into the shadowy woods, leaving Echo to her whispers, Narcissus to his pool, and your mind to its own echoing questions. The pool's mirrored calm dissolves behind you as you step back onto the winding path that ties these mythic arguments together. Threads of fear, riddles, bargains, and moral puzzles that twist like olive roots under your feet. Above it all, the marble halls of Olympus flicker back into view, torchlight shimmering like distant stars. Here at the summit of divine bickering, the council still murmurs. But tonight, you see it for what it truly is, an immortal irony that even gods, in all their thunder and wine, never settled the debates they started. You stand once more near the columns, where Zeus frowns at scribbled fates. Hermes flips coins for the last word. Athena polishes arguments sharper than any spear. And Dionysus lounges in soft defiance of every sober rule. Prometheus lingers in the corner of your mind, still smuggling sparks through shadows. Orpheus hums below ground, his secrets curling under marble floors. Pan's laughter rustles unseen branches, while Echo's last syllables drift like fireflies into the night. One fact lingers like the taste of cold wine. Greek myths didn't tidy up the world's questions, they cracked them wider open. The philosophers came later, chiseling words into syllogisms. But the gods had already staged the first endless debate about justice, about power, about what it means to know anything at all. A quirky truth flickers in your memory. Even in the sleepy corners of ancient households, clay oil lamps sometimes bore tiny scribbles mocking the gods, little mortal jokes about Zeus's roving eye or Hera's jealous schemes. Proof that for every grand temple inscription, there was a quiet, sly reminder that no immortal ever won an argument for good. Mortals knew it, and maybe that's why they kept retelling the stories long after the last oracle fell silent. Historians still argue whether these myths were serious lessons or playful cautionary tales. Maybe they were both. Maybe that's why they live on drifting through your mind when the house goes quiet and the fan hums like a priest's chant. Maybe that's why even now you're here, eyes half closed, listening to the soft thunder of divine disagreements that never quite fade. You look once more at the council. Ares, glaring, Athena, sighing, Hermes, smirking, Dionysus, smothering a laugh in the rim of his goblet. They watch you back, but they won't offer an ending. They can't. The argument loops on immortal as they are. And maybe that's the final comfort, that for all their wine wisdom trickery and thunderbolts, the gods never quite figured it all out either. So you let the marble pillars blur into the dark. Let the soft debates curl under your eyelids like warm smoke. Somewhere in the distance, a nymph giggles. A fox slips between shadows. A thundercloud rumbles with the promise of another riddle yet unsolved. You drift away, knowing the truth, hidden in every ancient argument, that sometimes the best answer is no answer at all. Just the gentle hum of a question echoing through the dark, rocking you softly toward sleep. The council's chamber fades to starlight. The marble turns to mist. You rest now, wrapped in contradictions, older than any book safe in the knowledge that even the gods couldn't silence their own restless debates. Sleep well, philosopher. May your dreams be filled with quiet riddles and soft thunder. The pool's mirrored hush fades behind you as you follow the winding path upward, one final time past bramble and echo past Pan's soft laughter, back to where the marble pillars of Olympus rise into the night sky, like thoughts you can't quite shake. The council is still here, voices drifting like lazy smoke. But now you see them not as judges or tyrants, but as restless minds who never found the last word. You stand again near Zeus's thunder throne, his knuckles resting on bolts of lightning he rarely bothers to hurl. Hermes catches your eye with a sly grin, flipping that same silver coin you've seen in every twist of this mythic maze. Athena traces a finger over her bronze breastplate, polishing the same riddle she posed to Ares centuries ago. Dionysus, half awake in his wreath of ivy, lifts a goblet in your honor, because the best debates always end with a soft toast and no final answer. A single truth stays with you, like warm breath on a cold night. These myths weren't puzzles to be solved, but soft doorways into the human mind. The philosophers carved their questions in courtyards. The gods whispered them through feasts and quarrels, and mortals, sitting by olive wood fires, passed the arguments on spinning them into stories that drifted over generations like candle smoke through temple rafters. A tiny, overlooked detail flits by, like Hermes' winged sandals, scraps of ancient graffiti mocking Zeus, or echoing a lost riddle scribbled on the inside of a pot. Proof that even the humblest hands kept the arguments alive, reminding themselves that no thunderbolt can silence a curious mind. Historians still argue whether these myths were caution comfort or cosmic comedy. Maybe they were all three. Maybe that's why they linger now, brushing your eyelids as they droop reminders that not every question needs a neat ending to be worth carrying into sleep. The marble pillars grow softer, dissolving into starlight. The gods' voices thin to a warm hum, like a lullaby, sung by old friends who've been debating the same riddle for centuries. You feel the cool hush of olive leaves, the hush of a fox's step, the hush of your own breath, evening out. So rest here at the edge of their immortal irony, knowing the council will keep debating long after you've slipped away into quieter questions of your own. Close your eyes. Let the thunder fade. Let the riddles uncoil and drift like olive pollen on a warm breeze. There is no final answer here, just soft laughter. A rustle of laurel leaves a wine cup left half full for when you return. If this tale has carried you gently towards sleep, leave a flicker of your waking self behind somewhere in the dark. Whisper your name to the stars and tell them Which forgotten god you'd debate with if dreams had a council of their own? Sleep well, soft thinker. May your night be long, your dreams gentle, and your questions always just out of reach, like a riddle from a god who smiles as you drift away.